Y se la dejaron sin coger.
La aceituna tiran en el suelo.
Los jornaleros que pasen hambre y la cosecha de la aceituna del año pasado, pues la estamos viendo palpablemente con nuestros ojos. Y los obreros pues pasando hambre por este delito, por venir a la finca para poder trabajar, poder ganar un duro y pelear para que nos pongan la renta agraria, pues entonces los jornaleros pues venga denuncia, venga embargo, venga cárcel y venga de todo. ¿Y qué pasa? ¿Que creen que vamos a escarmentar? Yo creo que los obreros tenemos que ponernos las pilas, tanto hombres como mujeres, y decir que la tierra es de quien la trabaja.
Desde la lógica más básica, no tiene sentido que una finca a 10 kilómetros de un pueblo, con un 70% de paro, esté con la aceituna en el suelo y que la gente de ese pueblo se tenga que ir a 1000 kilómetros para buscarse un salario. Es que no cabe en cabeza alguna. No cabe en cabeza ninguna.
El tema que coja esa aceituna, te echan de la finca y encima te multan.
Y cuando dices tú, ¿dónde está el delito? A mí que me digan dónde está el delito que estamos cometiendo. El decir y señalar un problema y a unos culpables.
Cuando la finca es de un banco que los 6 primeros meses ya gana 4.000 millones de euros. Además, el BBVA coge y todos los años le dan 600.000 euros de subvención, que estamos hablando de mucho dinero, por tener la finca así, solo por tenerla así. Cuando esos dineros de la subvención tendría que ser para esto, para cuidar la finca, para arreglarla, para que dé trabajo y jornales.
La política agraria común de la Unión Europea, la PAC, a cuanto más finca más grande, más subvención.
Y se están enriqueciendo con fondos públicos, porque al final es el dinero de todo, ¿no?
Son 600.000 euros al año para esto.
Esos son fijos.
600.000 euros al año para esto.
Y
esto no es un árbol nada más, esto es hambre en nuestro pueblo.
Exactamente.
Eso no es otra cosa.
Y eso es lo que no queremos.
Nosotros ya no queríamos ni que la comprara la Junta de Andalucía, sino que nosotros la comprábamos por medio de las cooperativas. Y fíjate qué poquillo que es, pero se crearía pleno empleo joven.
Claro. Yo creo que incluso atenta contra los derechos humanos, porque nos estamos buscando la vida de una manera y encima ni nos dejan.
Claro. Atenta contra el derecho al trabajo, atenta contra el derecho a la alimentación, atenta contra el derecho al territorio, atenta contra todo. Y eso era lo bueno que nosotros siempre fuimos con el proyecto que había aquí, que atacaba todo eso y por eso mismo no era algo que podían permitir así a la buena, porque tú estabas rompiendo con el monocultivo que no han impuesto, porque aquí en esta finca había un proyecto integral de eso, de meter los invernaderos, de meter los pistachos, de meter frutales, de meter espárragos, de meter todo eso y encima transformarlo.
El proyecto era ecológico.
Vamos juntos, lo trabajamos juntos y lo distribuimos juntos, entonces es algo que ni por asomo podían permitir y que prefieren que la aceituna se pudra en el suelo antes de que cunda el ejemplo de que los jornaleros y las jornaleras pues van juntos a trabajar la tierra y a luchar por ella.
Los jóvenes o la mayoría no son conscientes de que si hay una persona que saca un beneficio, pues ¿por qué no se puede sacar un beneficio colectivo si se trabaja de una manera diferente? Entonces eso yo creo que es el reto que tenemos en transformar esa mentalidad.
Tengo derecho a vivir como persona y como mujer. Y vivir con libertad, no con represión, no con la autoridad encima. Quiero libertad.
Nosaltres lluitem per garantir el dret a un habitatge digne i aturem desnonaments i denunciem una llei hipotecària profundament injusta. Defensem l'accés de totes les persones als drets socials més bàsics, la llibertat d'expressió i manifestació, un sistema sense desigualtats. A qui heu de perseguir? A nosaltres o a ells?
Cinco desahucios cada día, mínimo hacen ellos, y a nosotros no nos llegan.
Ni una cuarta parte.
¿Qué va?
5 cada día, son 25 a la semana, son 100 al mes. 100 al mes, a nosotros nos llega una décima parte. De ahí viene la necesidad de ocupar de forma colectiva y de ocupar políticamente y reivindicar políticamente bloques. Como este, como el otro.
Ay, qué bonito. ¿Lo tienes puesto aquí?
Sí, lleva mucho tiempo. Este cuando estaba Julio y...
mira, aquí es la foto, esta es la del día de la ocupación, qué bonito.
Jo crec que a través de moviments com la PA, no només la PA, molta gent ha entès que els límits legals no han de ser un impediment, que aquest marc legal és profundament injust, que si es participa d'un moviment polític revolucionari, transformador, etc., evidentment el marc legal no serà suficient, s'haurà de desobeir.
Este bloque lleva 8 años vacío. ¿Cómo se puede permitir un bloque de 8 años vacíos? Sea de quien sea.
Tiene que haber muchos pisos vacíos todavía.
En Sabadell, 10.000.
pisos, ¿eh?
Toda la gente estaría realojada.
¿Cómo se llamaba?
Si es la misma administración que manda a la gente a la paz porque no hayan que hacer, no saben cómo solucionar la emergencia social de vivienda.
Para que le gestionemos.
Son ellos
No
los que
solo
mandan a la
eso.
gente a la paz.
La administración manda a la gente a la paz.
Los Mossos mandan a la gente a la paz.
Pero el juzgador
Y
tiene el
también-
flyer nuestro. Si al final logramos que se den los alquileres sociales en casos de ocupación,
Si se consiguiera eso sería genial.
eso será, bueno,
Porque
será un precedente, volveremos
a
a
la
hacer
familia
historia.
Este bloque tenía 4 años cerrado. Estaban estropeando las viviendas.
Había 2 pisos que se estaban deteriorando por completo. Había
40 familias, por lo
40
cual son
pisos.
40 viviendas.
40 pisos. Y gente viviendo, creo, si no recuerdo mal, 180...
88 niños.
88 niños. Pero claro, han ido naciendo. O sea,
Hay que contar lo que van haciendo.
son
Sí,
viviendas
sí,
y ellos
sí,
le
sí,
llaman
sí, sí.
activos tóxicos a las viviendas.
Conseguimos entrar un buen día, un 13 de abril, poco a poco se fue tomando vida y al cabo de 3 meses, ¿cuánto? 4 meses, el bloque estaba a la mitad, en 4 meses, y a cabo de otros 4 meses el bloque estaba a tope. Y ya se nos quedó pequeño. Y de ahí la necesidad de coger ese otro que hemos cogido ahora.
Luego tuvimos el apoyo de la Asociación de Vecinos siempre desde el primer momento, el apoyo de todos los colectivos de la ciudad de Sabadell, la gente nos ha apoyado siempre. Yo creo que eso es súper importante, que la ciudad de Sabadell siempre ha estado de nuestra parte, porque es verdad que es emergencia social el hecho de que la gente se esté quedando en la calle.
I des de la PA doncs, nosaltres sempre hem buscat aquestes aliances amb la gent que ja està fent coses, no? I d'alguna manera és com treballem en xarxa amb els altres col·lectius de la ciutat. Detectem casos de precarietat laboral, treballem amb CGT, amb COS, detectem un cas de violència masclista, de violència de gènere, i si no som expertes en com abordar, en com aconsellar aquesta persona, en com acompanyar-la en aquest procés, tenim les companyes de Justa Revolta que sí ho són, no? I després, a més, com explica l'Uri, doncs busquem els mecanismes de sistematitzar això i de generar estructures que pal·liïn les necessitats que sorgeixen.
Que la gent entengui que la perspectiva de transformació és global, que no n'hi ha prou, com dèiem, amb intentar canviar la situació de l'habitatge, sinó que hi ha moltíssimes coses més a transformar.
Comisión Recursos, Comisión Difusión, Obra Social, Comisión de Support, Grup de Dones. Seguimos, Comisión de Casos, Comisión de Autogestión.
En La Paz tenemos gente de 58 nacionalidades diferentes.
Hi ha persones a l'assemblea, com heu vist, que són de diferents procedències i que el que els uneix és un enemic comú, una problemàtica comuna i que ningú ja para atenció per la pròpia necessitat objectiva del problema que té en saber si tu ets d'Equador o tu ets català, no sé què, me la suda això.
Jo crec que la PA, no només a Sabadell, sinó fins i tot a nivell de l'estat espanyol, ha sigut una trinxera contra el feixisme i el racisme.
Hola. Hola. Ay, no.
¿Pero esto qué es? Hola. Corre.
Estar sin casa.
Sí, sin casa.
¿Eh? Y ahora tienes casa de estar sin casa.
Ahora muy contenta, ¿eh?
Ahora muy contenta.
Qué grande que es, qué grande
Ahora muy
que es.
contenta. ¿Y Aglam, tu marido al final, qué? ¿Dónde está?
Está mal de casa.
¿Vendrá?
¿No va a poder venir al final o qué?
Ahora no puede venir.
¿Y este
No puede venir porque no tiene papeles y no le deja entrar, a pesar de que ella sí que tiene documentación, tiene papeles y todo, y
Pero
4
fue-
niños españoles porque tienen la nacionalidad también. No, su marido no puede venir de Marruecos para acá.
Pues fue un caso traumático, fue un caso que nos conmovió a todos, porque venía cargada de niños y no estuvo...
Embarazada.
Y embarazada, así de embarazadísima. Este es y será por mucho tiempo el bloque insignia de la obra social de La Paz, no de Sabadell solo, por supuesto, pero de la obra social de La Paz. No hay ningún otro tan grande en ninguna obra social que se haya hecho. Ninguno.
En junio fue, ¿no? Que querían desalojar.
Sí, íbamos a bajar y recién venidos aquí.
El miedo, entonces sí que pasasteis miedo todos los que estabais aquí.
Bueno, pasamos unas horas jodiditas, pasamos un tiempo así, pero bueno, también le dimos una vuelta a la situación y la eclosión nos viene el 9 de septiembre. Cuando el 9 de septiembre la Generalitat hace público que la Sareb lo cede a la Generalitat para darlo en alquiler social. Eso es uno de los triunfos más grandes que ha tenido La Paz nunca.
Me va a dar mucha alegría verte en la asamblea hoy.
mismo no nos acompaña mucho, pero el chocolate sí, que está calentito.
Le presento aquí un proyecto que han preparado para Gamonar. Pretende el ayuntamiento colarnos un bulevar con el andar de cemento, pa' que les voy a contar. Saben todos ustedes que no hace falta, todos los vulgares se piensan lo mismo pero se callan, menos estos valientes de Gamonar que salen a la calle y a protestar. El resto de España ya se ha dado cuenta que tengan cuidado, esto es una mecha que como se encienda con viento de lado, seguro que va de Almería a Bilbao. Y al alcalde le proponemos dejar todo como está y escuchar la voz del pueblo y no se quiera enferrar de nada hacer este proyecto de dichoso bulevar. Dedique nuestro dinero a la educación y a la sanidad y no apoderar al obrero de este gran barrio que es Gamonar. ¡Ole!
Hola a tota l'audiència, esteu sentint Ràdio Mistelera al 101.4 de la FM. La Mistelera és un centre social autogestionat. Avui debat sobre l'ensenyament ací a la Mistelera.
Ens ensenyen a memoritzem un tema, arriba a l'hora d'examen i parlant mal, gomitem el tema i el dia següent ja l'olvidem. Això no s'aprendre. Això d'aprendre a memoritzar i oblidar, vamos. Per a mi això no és ensenyança.
El sistema educatiu, des del principi, està mal organitzat. Una persona no pot ser productiva si està tancat 6 hores seguides, aprofitem 2 o 3 primeres hores i després ja ens cansem i és que no entra res. Així no com tenim que aprendre.
Jo tinc 36 alumnes per a mi soles, en una aula. Sap que han llevat el desdoblament, entonces, clar, això va en perjudici dels alumnes.
Realment hem de veure quins espais creem on els nostres cadellets puguen créixer segurs i lliures des de les seues necessitats reals i no des d'uns objectius imposats per un ministeri d'un estat que està treballant a favor del capitalisme i de l'explotació de l'ésser humà en tot el conjunt.
I que ha creat una llei ara, la LOMCE. Les paraules que més ixen en la LOMCE es mercado, competitividad, resultados y rendimiento económico.
Eso en el diseño que se hace desde el poder es evidente que tiene una función de doma del alumnado.
Jo sempre poso com a exemple l'escola de llibre d'ensenyança que van llaure durant la Segona República, que eren els propis alumnes que tenien que buscar la nostra pròpia ensenyança. És a dir, el professor estava per a guiar-nos, per a fer-nos buscar què volem ensenyar-nos.
Aprender a pensar, aprender a investigar, aprender a aprender, no solo contenidos memorizados. Y eso supone, por ejemplo, aprendizaje cooperativo y una mayor democracia en los centros escolares.
Desde pequeños ya estamos preguntando por qué pasan las cosas y no lo estamos haciendo por algo práctico, porque nos vaya a servir en la vida, sino por el mero placer de conocer cómo funciona este mundo.
Veig que el problema de l'educació també és un problema de cultura i pense que està bé difondre i potenciar una cultura llibertària, autogestionada, antagonista, alternativa I moltes voltes també això es fa en mitjans com aquest, Ràdio Mistelera. I en penitència heu de sentir els 300 programes que tenim mitjans a internet. És una labor revolucionària, amics i companyes.
Pensionistas, jubilados, a la calle debemos salir a luchar por las pensiones con las cuales podamos vivir, que nos dejen de monsergas, de que no nos la pueden pagar. Sí se puede si estamos unidos en la lucha por el bienestar. Sí se puede que hemos cotizado durante la vida laboral. ¡Viva la sanidad pública! ¡Viva!
Me preguntabas antes cuándo empezó la privatización. Empezó ese año, el año 91. En ese año ya empezaban a privatizarse servicios no sanitarios. La última base importante de privatización es el Real Decreto 16-2012, que no solamente excluye a los emigrantes o a la gente sin papeles, sino que introduce criterios manifiestamente privatizadores.
Reducen plantillas, reducen camas, a ti no te pago, a ti tampoco, a ti te debo, tú este complemento todo lo que te lo doy.
Por ejemplo, puede haber anestesistas que estén atendiendo 2 quirófanos. Sí. Eso es una locura. Y eso ha producido en algún caso muerte, porque no han llegado.
Se ha visto que ha fracasado el modelo Alcira. Se ha visto que ha fracasado el modelo de Thatcher privatizador de Reino Unido. Están imitando y continuando modelos que han fracasado.
Hablamos de que el 66% de los centros donde pone público ya no lo son. Solamente lo pone, como aquí pone en Madrid, para hospital público. Pero si no es público, si tiene dueños privados, si son o Capio, o Rivera Salud, o Sanitas, ¿qué nos están contando?
Subastando lo nuestro, a ver quién da más.
Y nos han convertido de pacientes o de usuarios en clientes. Y eso es un modelo norteamericano, que es el que nos quieren imponer.
Así es un estudio muy bien planteado desde la lógica pura y dura capitalista.
Volvemos aquí a la frecuencia de Radio Vallecas 107.5 de la FM, esta mañana que nos ha irrumpido aquí el tema de la sanidad pública, la sanidad universal. Ya está pasando también a autóctonos, a personas españoles que están dejando también de tener acceso a los servicios sanitarios.
Sí, eso es así. Que primero afectaba más directamente a las personas que no tenían el permiso de residencia, pero está afectando a más gente. En algunos casos se ha demostrado la existencia de muertes por este motivo.
Como la de Janet Beltrán.
O Alfapam, y los que no nos hemos enterado.
Es un problema de un modelo que quiere priorizar el beneficio económico frente a la situación de las personas y los derechos humanos.
No tener un techo repercute fortísimamente en la salud. No tener acceso al agua repercute totalmente en la salud. Y por supuesto, no tener acceso a la medicación.
¿Cuántos pacientes tienen que fallecer para dar dinero para hepatitis C? Que no son muertes, que son asesinatos.
Han muerto 4.000, en el 2014 4.000, más multiplicado entre 10 y 12 personas que fallecen diariamente.
El ejemplo que te ponía, el de la hepatitis C, el tema es clarísimo. Es decir, una empresa que de pronto pone tratamientos entre 25 y 50.000 euros. cuando realmente nos consta, y todo el mundo sabe, porque además ha salido información, que la fabricación de esto no va más allá de 100-115 euros el tratamiento.
Esto es un genocidio de Estado, porque si están muriendo las personas habiendo un tratamiento...
Yo te doy mis impuestos y tú me curas y me pongo malito.
Efectivamente.
Punto. Y no puedes romper el trato, ya está.
Tienen que recibir el tratamiento ya, inmediatamente. ¡Lo queremos ya!
¿Quién es ese comité que decide quién vive y quién no vive? Porque yo lo veo así.
Que tienen acciones en las farmacéuticas, cariño.
Totes les empreses farmacèutiques tenen l'origen de la vida, que són les llavors. No solament les transgèniques. Estan comprant com a bojos les llavors normals. Clar, aquesta gent té molta força, perquè té l'origen de la vida, com mos envenen a través dels aliments o insecticides, els additius químics que es foten als aliments per conservar-los, per donar-los més sabor, més color, també els fan ells, i després acaben tancant el cercle amb els medicaments que no curen, perquè si curessin no seria negoci.
Pero ¿qué está ganando esta gente? Claro, así pasa, tienen más poder que los estados.
Farmacèutica i armamentística són els més poderosos del món. La indústria farmacèutica sola té 400.000 milions de beneficis a l'any,
Parece que vivimos en un mundo democrático donde realmente vivimos bajo una dictadura absoluta de las multinacionales.
La globalització, doncs, totes aquestes polítiques neoliberals són una desiderata d'un model econòmic que és el capitalisme, que només té com a objectiu l'obtenció dels beneficis en el mínim període de temps possible. Això és el capitalisme. Representa que aquestes polítiques estan millorant l'economia espanyola? No. L'economia espanyola presenta 6 milions de persones aturades, un 50% d'atur juvenil, un col·lapse en tot el que és el seu sector productiu, uns nivells de desigualtat bestials, uns nivells de pobresa que ja afecten a una de cada 4 persones, pobresa infantil, uns nivells d'angoixa, de depressió. Estan millorant les condicions? No. Però què estan fent? Estan sent molt efectives en el que volen fer de veritat, que és concentrar la riquesa.
No se puede hablar de bienestar de uno a costa de dejar en la miseria más absoluta a otro.
L'economia espanyola és una de les economies en què més han crescut els supermilionaris, però en canvi hi ha molta més població pobra. Les nostres societats endeutades, societats que tenen un deute molt gran, en el cas de l'economia espanyola en aquests moments del 100% del seu PIB, la prioritat és pagar el deute. Fins i tot reformarem la Constitució, artículo 135, porque la prioridad de política económica sigue el retorno del deute.
Por tanto, la crisis ha sido una gran estafa. Y por eso yo digo que la trampa, la deuda no debe pagarse.
Los ladrones de hoy día ya no atracan a los bancos, atracan a la persona. Hay ladrones de igual que blanco.
A mí me parece que hay un elemento central que tiene que ver
no solo con la disputa de la economía, de la hegemonía económica, no solo con la disputa de la hegemonía política, que a mí me parece que es central, sino también con la disputa de la hegemonía cultural. La publicidad es un poderosísimo mecanismo para estarte metiendo lo que no necesitas de forma constante, aparte de ser un generador de insatisfacción permanente, porque el modelo de consumo a ultranza solamente se puede sostener si la gente está permanentemente infeliz y satisfecha. Parece que siempre te falta algo para poder llegar a eso nuevo que ha aparecido y que todavía no tienes, ¿no? Y es una cosa como imparable.
Ni siquiera podemos decir que son grupos grandes de comunicación, son emporios empresariales. Y la medida en que son emporios empresariales, tienen un departamento que se encarga de trabajar la imagen y la comunicación. El grupo Prisa tenía una deuda 5 veces más de lo que valía en bolsa. ¿Por qué se mantiene un grupo de comunicación que debe 5 veces más de lo que vale? Evidentemente porque los beneficios que provoca no son el dinero, sino son un beneficio editorial, un beneficio ideológico, un beneficio de crear valores y ideología, ¿no?, en una línea concreta de intereses financieros y económicos.
Se suele decir que el poder económico ahora mismo presiona y tiene totalmente subyugado, tiene totalmente sometido al poder político. Yo diría que es que en muchos casos son lo mismo. Es decir, cuando tú ves, por ejemplo, toda esta política de puertas giratorias, y yo creo que una buena parte de la crisis de legitimidad del modelo democrático actual viene por ahí.
Yo creo que capitalismo y democracia son dos conceptos antagónicos. Un capitalismo significa el dominio del capital, la dictadura de los que tienen el dinero. El Fondo Monetario Internacional, el Banco Mundial, 8 o 10 grandes multinacionales, son las que controlan el mercado. I el mercat se convierte en una dictadura.
Nosaltres avancem cap a entorns en els que la societat no podem decidir. O sigui, la política està segrestada pels mercats. I aquest és el tercer gran col·lapse del capitalisme. Si el capitalisme del segle XXI no tolera la democràcia.
A ti te hacen creer que tú eliges, pero tú no eliges. Si tú votas republicano en los Estados Unidos, votas capitalismo. Y si votas demócrata en los Estados Unidos, votas capitalismo. Si tú votas aquí PSOE, votas capitalismo. Y si votas PP, votas capitalismo. Y algunos nuevos que están apareciendo, que ya veremos si no votamos también capitalismo. Entonces, el tema es que no nos sirve el capitalismo si decimos que somos demócratas. Y lo de Grecia me parece que es una salvajada. O sea, que desde fuera te impongan, eso se llama terrorismo económico y social. No democracia, en la democrática Unión Europea.
El golpe de Estado ya se hace financieramente y se hace por instituciones supranacionales que no se presentan a las elecciones. El FMI, el Banco Mundial, el Banco Central Europeo, la Troika.
El Tratado de Libre Comercio, el TTIP, un tratado entre la Unión Europea y Estados Unidos, se está negociando a nuestras espaldas.
El Estado lo que va a tener es que cumplir las normas que indica el tratado. Ese tratado va a estar por encima de la Constitución.
Y eso da lugar a que, por ejemplo, haya 300.000 sustancias químicas presentes en alimentos, cosméticos o higiene, permitidas en Estados Unidos, pero prohibidas en Europa. Con el Tratado de Libre Comercio, al igualar las legislaciones, estas sustancias serían permitidas también en Europa, ¿vale? Con las consecuencias en términos de salud y también medioambientales.
También introducirían el fracking y las corporaciones, las multinacionales, podrían demandar a los estados por crear leyes que vayan en contra de sus intereses, o sea, que no les hagan ganar dinero.
El gran problema que tenemos ahora es que estamos en una nueva Crisis cíclica del capitalismo, de las que ha habido muchas, pero la novedad de esta crisis es que ya hemos empezado a topar con los límites del planeta.
El capitalisme ha col·lapsat com a model, ha col·lapsat socialment, per tot el que diem, però és que ha col·lapsat ecològicament també. O sigui, no ho diem nosaltres, els que som molt crítics amb el capitalisme, ho diuen els científics, la comunitat científica.
Hace poquito se volvió a publicar la última revisión del informe del IPCC, del Panel Intergubernamental de Cambio Climático, que representa al 95% de la comunidad científica. Lo que viene a plantear es que como de aquí a 20 años no se hayan tomado medidas que pasan en el caso de la Unión Europea por reducir en un 80% las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, que eso es cambiar el modelo económico, productivo y de organización social de arriba abajo, nos vamos a encontrar en una situación de llegar a un punto de no retorno. Si toda la población del planeta consumiera como la media de una persona española, nos harían falta entre 3 y 4 planetas. Como la media de una persona de los Estados Unidos, más de 5. Quienes tienen poder económico, político y militar sostienen su modelo de vida a costa de que cada vez más gente quede fuera. Y esto es mucho de lo que vemos en estas guerras. Si tú empiezas a destruir territorio fértil, empiezas a destruir otras formas de vida para poder extraer los minerales que se ocultan en el subsuelo, pues las personas que vivían o de los cultivos o de cualquier otro tipo de actividad en esos territorios, lo primero que sucede es que se ven obligadas a abandonarlos. Es decir, que cuando se produce el fenómeno de la migración, antes de no dejar entrar, que ya es un drama, lo que sucede es que no les han permitido quedarse.
Com aquesta gent estan intentant saltar totes les barreres policials d'una forma desesperada i veiem com el món occidental els rebutja de forma policial, de forma autoritària. Aquestes són les societats que volem construir. Societats autoritàries, societats securitàries, societats de la paranoia, on tothom intentarà resguardar-se i protegir-se la seva riquesa dels bàrbars que ens la volen prendre. Bàrbars que representen dels 7.000 milions, 6.000. Per tant, o avancem cap a mecanismes de redistribució globals de la riquesa que existeix, o la nostra societat serà una societat militaritzada.
El tótem de la seguridad. Toda esta legislación represiva está dictada con la excusa de la seguridad. Dicen que nos sentimos inseguros y como nos sentimos inseguros nos tienen que dar seguridad. Que tenemos que ceder espacios de libertad por tener esa seguridad.
Aquí se funciona, si te detienen, y ya no solo la paliza que te pegan en la calle, que también en comisaría te torturan, te collejean, te insultan, cosas como rojo de mierda, bucanero, perros flautas, y no te dan comida, no te dan manta, no te dan colchoneta, no te dejan ir al servicio, no te dan agua.
Saca la ley Mordaza, esa es la ley de Franco, para que tú no te muevas y para meterte más miedo.
La ciudadanía se sentiría más segura y más tranquila si tuviera eso que es reconocimiento de la Constitución. Sanidad, educación, vivienda, trabajo. Eso es lo que nos daría seguridad. Y nos intentan vender que la seguridad es que haya más policía en la calle, más presos en las cárceles y más represión.
Pides asistencia médica porque tienes la cara así, que yo salí con la cara negra, me rompieron una muñeca, dedos del pie de pisotones, les pedí asistencia médica, no me sacaron, y cuando llegué a Plaza Castilla, que llegué descalza, hecha un cromo, ya la jueza fue la que me dijo que fuera al hospital, y todos los partes de lesiones se pierden, o sea, que funciona así sistemáticamente.
Se criminalizan dos sectores en la población, la pobreza y la disidencia. La disidencia pacífica. Porque si ellos hablan de manifestantes pacíficos y violentos y por el Código Penal ya están los violentos, ¿para qué haría falta la ley Mordaza? Si los violentos del Código Penal, la ley Mordaza está para los manifestantes pacíficos.
Y encima te acusan de atentar contra la autoridad, te meten penas de 1 año y 9 meses, 8.000 euros de multa, y así es como funciona el Estado policial en este país.
metas en líos, que eso era lo típico que oías de chiquitilla, ¿no? Decir, tú cuidado, que solo te ponen en listas si te metes en líos. Volvemos a hablar de listas, que decía, papá, pero qué tonterías me dices ahora de listas, no entendías. Vuelven a existir las listas y nadie dice nada.
Los compañeros de profesión que están en un medio grande tienen la responsabilidad de decirlo. Y si hay una especie de silencio orquestado de miedo a ser molesto.
Hemos tenido que venir aquí al distrito de Moratalaz a luchar y a reivindicar que saquen a 4 chavales que todavía siguen detenidos.
La detención está basada en una lucha tan justa y necesaria como es la de los desahucios.
¡Nuestros hijos no son delincuentes!
Y tengo que luchar, sí. Y ese miedo hay que quitárselo a los jóvenes.
La primera función es reprimirte, ¿no? Que es amedrentar a la gente, meter miedo, que la gente no tenga miedo a estar en política. La segunda es desviarte de tu objetivo político.
Los que estamos en la lucha no podemos ser siempre la misma gente, ¿no? Tiene que ser más gente y cómo llegar a esa gente y decirle, no hay que tener miedo, porque tenemos una asamblea antirrepresiva y con una asamblea antirrepresiva nos vamos a organizar, ¿no? Pero hay que llegar a esa gente también.
Y ejemplo de esa represión la tenemos a lo largo de todo el Estado. En Gamonal.
Hubo casi 50 detenidos en aquellos días, 13 de los cuales eran menores.
¡Contra su represión! ¡Nuestra solidaridad!
Lo que queremos recalcar desde la Asamblea de Gamonal todo este año trabajando es que los encausados nunca van a estar solos, sino que van a estar siempre apoyados por la Asamblea de Gamonal.
¡Violencia es no llegar a fin de mes!
A los juzgados no vamos a buscar justicia, que la justicia para nosotros implica algo mucho más grande, es una palabra con mayúscula. Y no es lo mismo aplicar la ley que hacer justicia.
¡Ni un paso atrás! ¡Gamonal!
En nuestro sindicato, que es el Sindicato Andaluz de Trabajadores, no tenemos menos de 500 trabajadores procesados, pendientes de juicio. Tenemos una petición de 53 años de prisión. Pero eso no nos va a parar ni nos vamos a arrodillar, vamos a seguir hacia adelante.
Nos vemos en la obligación de denunciar la complicidad entre los bancos por desahuciar a las familias, los jueces por autorizarlo y los policías por ejecutarlos.
Yo, por ejemplo, este que nos habla, estoy condenado a 3 años de prisión. El día 19 tengo un juicio penal por ocupar las tierras que he dicho del banco BBVA.
Y gracias a esa desobediencia, algunas personas, como han dicho la gente del SAT o de la plataforma de afectados por la hipoteca, se ha conseguido algo que hace 5 o 6 años parecía imposible, que es que la ciudadanía tiene asumidos los derechos sociales como propios, no como algo individualizado, sino como algo colectivo.
Porque lo que están haciendo con nuestros hijos no hay derechos, son hijos de trabajadores, de gente que hemos pagado nuestros impuestos, que cumplimos con nuestras obligaciones, no somos criminales.
Criminalizando estos movimientos pacíficos, lo que está intentando es que las ciudades los consideramos como delincuentes, pero muy al contrario. Y que a veces hay que desobedecer algunas normas que se consideran injustas, asumiendo en alguna medida las consecuencias de esa desobediencia para crear ese debate social y conseguir su modificación.
Tanto que aprietan, pues puede conseguir el efecto contrario, puede ser conseguir que haya una sociedad mucho más solidaria, que haya una sociedad mucho más unida, que haya una sociedad mucho más organizada y haya una sociedad mucho más dispuesta a transformar su realidad desde el aprendizaje que se hace en la lucha, porque en eso se van aprendiendo cosas también y se van cambiando y se van haciendo nuevos valores.
Yo creo que sí que ha habido un cambio de mentalidad, ¿no? Y un cambio de mentalidad bastante directo. Y a través del 15M creo que fue ese boom o esa chispa o esa yesca que hace que la llama empiece a prender.
Hacemos un llamamiento a la alegría, a la lucha, a la determinación y a la unión para parar los ataques contra los pueblos trabajadores. Exigimos la libertad sin cargos de nuestras y nuestros compañeros, así como la derogación de la ley Mordaza.
Yo llamo a la desobediencia civil a todos los trabajadores y trabajadoras.
Tanto la lucha en la calle como esta política de cambio en las instituciones también está haciendo que ellos tomado como un símbolo de poder, también estén teniendo miedo.
Tendrán pensado llenar las cárceles, porque desde luego no nos vamos a rendir. No nos queda otra que luchar, porque no tenemos nada que perder.
Efectivamente, efectivamente. Como decimos nosotros, ¿no? Claro. Las madres ya no lloramos, las madres luchamos.
Y estamos muy orgullosas de nuestros hijos, porque están luchando por los derechos y de las libertades de todo el pueblo y de la clase obrera. Estamos muy orgullosas de nuestros hijos.
De donde nacen los sueños, donde las utopías se conquistan con empeño.
Cogemos el ayuntamiento, pues tuvimos mayoría absoluta, vimos, bueno, el poder que ha servido para oprimir no puede servir para liberar. Hace falta un poder de los que no tienen poder, de darle voz a los que no tienen voz. Nosotros hemos abordado nuestro proyecto en 3 direcciones: democracia económica, democracia política, democracia social. Para que se contra el poder de los pobres frente al poder de los ricos, el poder de los explotados frente al poder de los explotadores sea efectivo, tiene que ser participado. Es el presupuesto, que es un presupuesto participado. Y la Asamblea se convierte en una especie de parlamento colectivo de los trabajadores, en un gobierno colectivo de los trabajadores donde se debate todo y donde todo se decide. Si se suben o no se suben los impuestos, o si hay buena finca, o si cómo se reparten las viviendas. Entonces, esta es la democracia política.
N'hi ha que fer la vaga, però n'hi ha que ir al carrer i explicar per què és la vaga.
Demanem que no, és que tinguin més pasta, siguen els que puguen estudiar.
No volem que es privatitzen l'educació.
Podem aconseguir el que vulguem a nivell local, a nivell comarcal.
No és per a mi, ni per a tu, ni per a l'altre, és per a tots.
Sigo viniendo a La Paz después de haber solucionado mi caso, porque a mí me hace grande el ver y a poder ayudar a todas las personas que van entrando por aquí, por la comisión.
Hemos llorado mucho y hemos dado la vuelta y ahora nos estamos riendo.
Tengo un problema con el BBVA y la mayoría de la gente tiene problemas con el BBVA, o sea que el BBVA es el que tiene problemas.
Muy bien.
¿Cómo era eso? La tierra para quien la trabaja, ¿no?
Exactamente.
Toma.
Con alternativas así, ¿no? De solares que están abandonados o destinados para solamente crear hormigón, pues se puede ir recuperando otras maneras de hacer y cultivar y de ahí comer algo que has trabajado tú con tus manos y que sabes que es sano.
Hoy justo el grupo de Yo Soy Sanidad de Vallecas va a hacer una acción en 2 centros de salud.
Tú vas a una sala de espera, llegas con alguno de los pacientes, les explicas un poco todo lo que ha ocurrido a raíz del Real Decreto, que hay casi 1 millón de personas excluidas, que estamos intentando sensibilizar
a médicos, administrativos y usuarios.
En el sector profesional, ¿qué es lo que se ha intentado por todos los medios? Que garantizáramos el seguir pudiendo atender a esta población afectada dentro del propio sistema sanitario público.
De los medio millón de jornaleros que hay en Andalucía, solamente le está cobrando el subsidio agrario el 40%. Y la alternativa nuestra consiste fundamentalmente en unificar renta agraria, subsidio agrario en uno solo. Que si queremos realmente que se acabe con el paro, con el subsidio, con el PER, la tierra es lo fundamental. Tierra para los ayuntamientos, tierra para las cooperativas, tierra para los pequeños agricultores, tierra para los trabajadores.
No es la explotación de la tierra, sino el aprovechamiento y la recuperación de la tierra, que eso también me parece importante.
Pues sí, que estaba en manos, ¿no?, de una UTE de 7 empresas que llevan especulando en esta ciudad toda la vida y siguen.
Pero les plantamos un
Aquí les hemos plantado un poquito cara.
Pero nos dimos cuenta que democracia política sin democracia económica era una gran mentira. Y por eso nosotros emprendemos la lucha por la tierra. ¿Cómo acabamos con el paro? La única forma de acabar con el paro, o por lo menos disminuir el paro, es teniendo tierra. ¿Quién tiene tierra? Buscamos, miramos y vimos quién tiene más tierra. El duque del Infantado, 4 veces grande de España, amigo personal del rey Juan Carlos, y dijimos, este es el nuestro. Hemos estado 12 años luchando contra el duque hasta que le hemos quitado la tierra.
Cuando las gotas se hacen lluvia,
esta reivindicación tiene que tomar cuerpo, porque si no toma cuerpo, gobierne quien gobierna, no escucha.
Demostrar que organitzant-nos, anant junts i anant a una, podem parar qualsevol cosa i podem tirar endavant.
Perquè estan posant en joc el nostre futur. Demanem que voleu i crideu. Crideu per una universitat pública i digna per a tots.
Hoy por hoy estoy así con los nervios de punta porque somos una de las familias beneficiadas de este bloque, pero a la vez estoy contenta porque tengo una casa para mis hijos y para mi familia.
Yo creo más en la comuna y menos en la cooperativa. Eso nos permite avanzar en la democracia. Democracia política sí, pero con pan, con vivienda. El suelo lo municipalizamos, le damos el suelo al joven que quiere la vivienda, le ponemos los albañiles y él pone su trabajo desde que empiece la casa hasta que se termine. Así que se consiguen vivienda por 15 euros al mes.
Nos rebelamos, hicimos desobediencia clara y llanamente, es un movimiento de desobediencia.
Des de la plataforma d'afectades per la hipoteca i la crisi de Sabadell, avui alcem de nou la veu i fem un altre pas endavant per garantir el dret a l'accés a l'habitatge. Aquesta tarda hem alliberat un quart bloc amb 27 habitatges a la nostra ciutat.
Esas tierras un día fueron arrebatadas al pueblo. Y que la tierra no la han fabricado ellos, ni nadie, sino que cuando llegó el ser humano ya estaba ahí. Por lo tanto tiene que estar al servicio de aquellos que la habitan y la trabajan. Pero claro, en el sistema capitalista actual plantea una reivindicación de expropiación de finca sin indemnización, tendría que ser con una presión social muy fuerte en la calle y una sociedad totalmente levantada, no en armas, pero sí levantada con todo el alma y con todo el corazón del mundo para derrotarlo.
i assegura que més de 2.500 persones que les entitats financeres i els poders públics han deixat al carrer tinguin un sostre on viure, per garantir que ni una sola persona de la ciutat estigui al carrer mentre segueixen havent-hi milers i milers de pisos buits. I ho hem fet sempre, sempre, a través de la desobediència civil i l'autoorganització col·lectiva.
Queremos que la tierra pública del Estado, igual que las tierras públicas de la Junta de Andalucía, que son 20.000 hectáreas, todas esas tierras pasen al patrimonio agrario andaluz, para que esas tierras pasen inmediatamente a cooperativas a proyectos sociales.
Habla la policía, no vamos a poder seguir caminando en cumplimiento de la legalidad vigente.
La tierra es para quien la trabaja.
Nosotros no queremos la propiedad de la tierra, queremos el uso de la tierra.
Ara la gestió d'aquest bloc serà col·lectiva i comunitària de la pah, evidentment, i no serà propietat ni possessió de cap dels afectats que vinguin a viure aquí. Que les solucions i els recursos estan al nostre abast, que sí que es pot, que ho fem possible cada dia. Aquests 27 habitatges alliberats avui en són un altre exemple. Visca la pah i visca la pah de Sabadell!
Esa pelea por la hegemonía cultural, ¿no? Y ese cambio de mirada sobre el mundo, yo creo que es un asunto central para los movimientos sociales y para los movimientos emergentes políticos.
tía, utilitzar la paraula revolució, eres un chalao, tu eres un pocho.
Bolchevique
no, anarquista. Jo crec que la revolució la entenem com una consciència massiva.
Siempre al ritmo que nos marca el sistema. Tendremos que ir creando nuestro propio ritmo.
No hay otro camino, y es volver a los elementos colectivos.
Yo creo que hay que ir a una asamblea constituyente, que hay que ir a una nueva constitución.
Me parece que se corre un riesgo grande si se depositan todas las esperanzas solo en lo institucional y se pierde el pulso y la tensión de la ciudadanía organizada en la calle.
Y eso es lo que principalmente lo que es lo positivo, ¿no? Que haya alternativa a este modelo. Y la alternativa solo necesitamos convencernos de que si nosotras y nosotras queremos, podemos materializarla.
Hem de recuperar, diguem-ne, la política per a la ciutadania. Però clar, això és un procés que no ens caurà del cel, ningú ens regalarà això, entens? O sigui, això ens ho haurem de guanyar.
Perquè no som un exèrcit d'esclaus, sinó persones lliures i conscients. Ens alcem per a trencar les barreres, que a poc estan acabant amb la nostra dignitat. No a la dictadura del mercat i no a l'abolició de la llibertat.
Jo penso que és aquest el desafiament que tenim nosaltres. Ja et dic, i per mi no és un desafiament de desig. O sigui, jo penso que no és que sigui el desig, és que és una necessitat.
És una necessitat.
Dice que la tierra es como un préstamo que nos han dado nuestros hijos y tenemos que devolvérselo mejor que lo recibimos.
El mundo se mueve constantemente y todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos. Se mueve la geopolítica mundial. Nos preguntamos qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento, cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan. Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
The story goes, you're gonna make it if you try, and if you don't, may your life waste away, 'cause it's your fault. Like the sheen of a rotting fish, the glitter just dazzles. For everyone who's filthy rich, a million must suffer. So start your climb up the money tree. The best slaves are those who think they're free. Oh, say, can you see Rome is burning? Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. As life unfolds, people struggle to make ends meet. Look around, what you see, the hunger, the homeless, the powerless streets. On your mind, the need for change. Channel your pain and your rage. Stand up and link your arms for strength. Shout it out to the police state. I can't breathe, that's why I take a knee. Won't take you for slavery. Oh, say, can you see Rome is burning? Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. Make no mistake, racism starts with the state to divide and rule the working class, to keep us broken, not building anew. Lessons of history revealed, organize or be displaced. The rulers have no solutions, only violence, wars and jails. Stick together and fight for your just claims. Workers united, we'll prevail. Oh, say, can you see Rome is over? Oh, build the new. 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 Oh, build the new.
In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomon. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests and motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on TeleSUR.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR.
Un canto por la América unida. Mira, que lo escuchan allá arriba. ¡Vamos! Somos la tierra, somos la arcilla, la esperanza que brota y germina. 500 años nos han pisoteado, aquí seguimos, de aquí no nos vamos. América, 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 lindísimo continente se levanta. Se levanta, unido que no calla. América, 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 lindísimo continente se levanta. Se levanta, unido que no calla. Pueblo latino, vamos para adelante, tumbando fronteras, somos gigantes, nadie se rinde, vamos para arriba, esa tierra es tuya y también es mía. Pueblo mestizo, guerrero y solidario, aquí nadie es extraño, aquí somos hermanos. Todos los países digan presente. Venezuela y Cuba presente. Nicaragua, Honduras presente. El Caribe entero. América, 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 se levanta. Se levanta. Pueblo unido que no calla. No se detiene. América, 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 se levanta. Se levanta. Pueblo unido que no calla.
Soy Tupacatari, soy hueca puro, 5 siglos resistiendo el atropello y el abuso. El avia ya la reflorece junto al alba, sin un solo continente porque rayos nos separa. Con Sucre y Bolívar seguimos pa'lante, pa' encima latino, no hay visa que nos pare.
Desde la Patagonia hasta el Río Bravo, los latinos levantamos la mano. América, 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 lindísimo continente se levanta. Se levanta, unido que no calla. América, América, lindísimo continente se levanta. Se levanta, unido que no calla. México y Bolivia presente. Puerto Rico libre. Todo el continente latino.
El primer ministro del estado de Kuwait saluda a la delegación venezolana que está presente en este país
árabe. Esto forma parte precisamente de esta cooperación necesaria en este tiempo histórico al que ha llamado el jefe de Estado venezolano. Ven ustedes a los ministros del gabinete ejecutivo de la delegación venezolana
government officials
presente.
from
Un
Venezuela
está surgiendo y
had been introduced to the
alza las
Kuwait
banderas de la
part.
diplomacia bolivariana de la paz en la construcción de un mundo multicéntrico y pluripolar. Dos naciones con una carga
These two nations that share a common history
de países exportadores de
and
petróleo
are member of the OPEC
1960 y como
since
potencias
1960.
energéticas. Venezuela es por excelencia el país con las mayores reservas de petróleo
Venezuela
del
is
mundo,
the country with
para
one of the
200
greatest
años. Se ubica en el
oil
cuarto
reserves in
lugar
the
con
world.
mayores reservas de gas y se está
Is in
certificando
the
para
first
ser la
place
segunda
as
reserva
one
de
of the
gas. Aunado a
the
ello,
first place as a gas with the
para la
gas
primera
reserves in the
reserva
world.
de oro, la primera reserva de diamantes, pero también reservas de hierro y bauxita. Una reunión al más alto nivel estratégico.
This is
Está
a
allí
very
el
important
jefe de
meeting
Estado
with high
venezolano,
government officials
justamente en el
of both
Palacio
countries.
Real, en compañía del primer
They are meeting
ministro
at the Royal
del
Palace.
Estado de Kuwait como parte de estas alianzas
President
necesarias
Maduro is
en la
meeting with the
geopolítica
Prime
actual. Con esta
Minister
información
and other
nos
high
ponemos en
government
contacto.
officials.
Gracias, Graya. Es parte de la información que mantiene hasta ahora directamente desde Kuwait y precisamente donde se han venido fortaleciendo esas relaciones.
Hello, welcome back to TeleSUR English. As we were watching live images of Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro Moro's visit, his official visit to Kuwait as part of his first official visit and also his international tour around the nations of Eurasia and Africa. President Maduro and his official delegation was welcomed at Kuwait's international airport by the Minister of Amri Diwan Affairs, His Excellency Sheikh Abdullah Mohammed Al-Mubarak Al-Shabah. The visit is intended to strengthen the relations between the two nations based on cooperation, brotherhood, peace, and mutual benefits. Venezuela and Kuwait are founding members of OPEC, and the Asian country is the fourth nation President Maduro visits during this international tour. The Venezuelan head of state seeks to advance in the construction of a multipolar world without hegemonism.
We have just arrived in Kuwait after an important tour, very useful, from Turkey to the north of Africa, to Iran, and two Arab lands, working for the construction of a better world. The new mankind getting together spiritually and building new moments of cooperation and prosperity of our motherland.
The President of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro Moros, in the framework of his official visit to Kuwait, met on Tuesday with the incoming Secretary General of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, Kuwait's Haitham Al-Ghais. The Venezuelan head of state, whose country has the largest crude reserves in the world, and Al-Ghais, who will formally take office next August, discussed the direction in which they should work together with the other OPEC member nations, according to official sources. As part of his official activities, the president of the South American nation also met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the president of the Kuwait Economic Fund, Ahmed Nasser Al-Mohammed Al-Sabah. President Maduro arrived in Kuwait with the purpose of expanding bilateral relations at all levels under the principles of mutual respect and self-determination of the peoples with a view of defending multilateralism. And Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro Moros visited on Monday the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khamenei's mausoleum. The mausoleum houses the tombs of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khamenei and his wife Khadija Sakafi and his second son Ahmad Khamenei and some political figures. It is custom that every high official or special guest pays tribute to Iran's supreme leaders visiting the mausoleum. The head of state signed a visitor's book at the mausoleum and left eulogy words on behalf of the Venezuelan people. Now we move on to other topics. A group of armed individuals stole 20 containers with gold, silver, and electronic devices on June 5th from a private property in the vicinity of the port of Manzanillo in the Mexican state of Colima. Local authorities report that a 12 to 15-man commando allegedly arrived at the facilities of the Maniobras Alonso Mireles company. After midnight, subdued the caretaker, the supervisors, and some forklift operators, locked them in a booth, and then committed the robbery by transporting the merchandise in the tractor trailers. Authorities are still checking the surrounding area, mostly from private companies, to find the perpetrators of the robbery. The president of the Argentinian Association Mothers of Plaza de Mayo, Hebe de Bonafini, expressed Monday her solidarity with the Colombian people and urged them to exercise their right to vote in order to build a better Latin America. In a letter published in the association's social network profiles, Bonafini described the elections as hopeful and affirmed that with the vote, many things are possible. The social activist wrote she felt the triumph was near and urged those who did not believe that it was possible to have a president like Petro and who thought that it was an unmakeable dream to go to the polls. Bonafino reiterated the association's obligations to build together a free Latin America and sentenced that the only fight that is lost is the one that is abandoned. Brazil is awaiting the experts' report on 2 bodies found in the Amazon that could correspond to Dom Phillips, the collaborator of the British media The Guardian, and Bruno Pereira, the Brazilian indigenist, both missing for a week. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ignacio Lemus, with the details.
Last June the 5th, British journalist Dom Phillips and indigenous activist Bruno Pereira disappeared in the Vale do Javari, a reserve in the Brazilian Amazon, near the border with Colombia and Peru. Both were interviewing indigenous communities affected by the invasion of extractive industries.
The government of Mr. Jair Bolsonaro is directly responsible for this situation of increased violence against the indigenous peoples of Brazil, for acting as a government by encouraging those sectors that cause deforestation, illegal mining, exploitation of water resources, and the eviction of indigenous peoples from these territories for the advancement of agribusinesses, mainly in the Brazilian Amazon.
The indigenous communities of Vale do Javari are asking for justice. Bruno Pereira was threatened for collaborating in the defense of indigenous territories abandoned by the Brazilian government. The former official of the government entity for indigenous protection, FUNAI, was exonerated by the Ministry of Justice of the Bolsonaro government in 2019. During the administration of the then Minister Sergio Moro, former judge in the Lava Jato case. The reason? Bruno Pereira denounced illegal miners in an operation that ended with the destruction of 60 rafts of invaders. In other words, he was expelled for doing his job well, and although he had served for 23 years, the Brazilian president considered him to be improvised.
Only 2 people on a boat in a region like that, completely wild, is an adventure that is not recommended.
In 2019, Dom Phillips had questioned Bolsonaro's anti-environmental policies.
New deforestation numbers show a scary increase. IBAMA is finding less and carrying out fewer operations. The signals that the government is giving to Europe this week are not positive in the sense of environmental protection. For example, the Minister of Environment was in Rondônia this week, together with deforesters. How the President intends to convince and show the world that the government is really concerned about the preservation of the Amazon. First, you have to understand that the Amazon belongs to Brazil, not to you. I repeat here, we preserve more than the whole world. No country in the world has the morals to talk about the Amazon.
The Supreme Court determined that the government should take all possible measures to find the journalist and the indigenous man and gave a period of 5 days for the actions to be detailed. Bolsonaro stated that dozens of people disappear every day and that the Supreme Court does not care about it. The disappearance had global repercussions. The United Nations qualified the searches as extremely slow.
We stress our concerns as to the wider context of constant attacks and harassment faced by human rights defenders, environmentalists, and journalists in Brazil.
Don Phillips' wife confirmed to the press on Monday that the embassy had confirmed that the two bodies found in Valle do Javari were those of the journalist and the indigenous man. But the federal police and the indigenous teams in the region denied the discovery. According to a report to the NGO Global Witness published in 2021, Brazil is the fourth country in murders of environmental defenders.
Ignacio Lemos y Julia Nassif para TeleSUR.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests and motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on TeleSUR. Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. On Monday, Ecuadorian security forces repressed indigenous organizations who were demonstrating nationwide in rejection of the economic and social policies of Guillermo Lazo's government. Student movements in the city of Quito denounced that they were repressed by the national police, who used tear gas bombs and blows, warning that their rights and liberties had been violated. The police have also reportedly attacked a group of civil society, students and social movement demonstrators in the vicinity of a school.
And we cannot at this moment accept as normal that the President of the Republic continues to say yes to everything imposed by the International Monetary Fund. It is a very delicate issue because the President is either with the people, or if he goes with the International Monetary Fund, this dignified people will not allow that imposition. We have met with all the comrades who are calling for this struggle on behalf of our children. We're old, but we don't want this country to continue to be a country of slaves, as other countries are. Today we come from Carceling Bajo to support our comrades from the community of San Miguel del Común, and also to tell them and invite them to go to the city to continue denouncing this government that is starving us and taking away the future of these children. We're not going to allow this to continue. We're going to stop this misgovernment because it is leaving us without health, without education, without scholarships, without doctors.
And on early morning, the police arrested Leonidas Issa, the leader of the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador in the sector of Pasto Calle, where he had participated in the blockade of the Pan-American highway in the sector known as El Chasqui. There he was read his rights, both in Quechua and Spanish, in which it was mentioned that he was being captured for the alleged crimes of rebellion and paralyzed in public service. Now we move on to other topics. Peruvian prosecutors set a new date for questioning President Pedro Castillo, who has been under investigation for 2 weeks for alleged corruption charges. Peruvian prosecutor Pablo Sanchez said the head of state will be questioned next Friday at the public prosecutor's office. In this regard, Castillo's lawyer, Benji Espinosa, explained that the Supreme Court will review the appeal of precautionary rights, which stated that the investigation should be dropped because it violates the president's immunity during the exercise of his duties. The United Kingdom government will submit to a parliament a bill allowing it to unilaterally amend the post-Brexit protocol for Northern Ireland. The executive, led by Prime Minister Boris Johnson, said the proposal aims to protect the integrity of the so-called Good Friday Agreements, which in 1998 put an end to the armed conflict in that British province. The so-called Northern Ireland Protocol was the formula found by London and Brussels to avoid the establishment of a physical border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland in the post-Brexit area. The measure provides, however, that all goods coming from Britain must be subject to customs and health checks to ensure that they comply with the European Union regulations. Human rights defenders protested this Monday morning in the High Court in the afternoon in front of the Home Office in London against the British government's immigration policy, which critics say involves the illegal deportation of immigrants to Rwanda. Human rights groups said the policy is inhumane and will put migrants at risk. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has said Rwanda, whose own human rights record is under scrutiny, does not have the capacity to process the claims, and there was a risk some migrants could be returned to countries from which they had fled. Activists are challenging the deportations on a person-by-person basis, seeking to ensure that no migrants will be eligible for deportation, even if the flights are allowed to go ahead. United Nations refugee chief Filippo Grandi on Monday slammed an imminent UK plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda as an all wrong, as day before the first plane load of claimants is due to depart, warning it will set a catastrophic precedent.
It is the foundation of the right to asylum that people that are on a country's territory, especially a country that is a signatory to the convention and has the institutions to deal with that, to export that responsibility to another country runs contrary to any notion of responsibility sharing, of international responsibility, and so forth. What am I going to tell them if they say, a rich country like the UK is sending them abroad? I'll do the same. I'll close my border. I say, I want to save them from a dangerous journey and they can go to another country. The precedent that this creates is catastrophic for a concept that needs to be shared like asylum.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us.
In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. travelers of knowledge. The future is today.
El mundo se mueve constantemente y todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos. Se mueve la geopolítica mundial. Nos preguntamos qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento, cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan. Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
Welcome back to From the South. The Russian State Duma denounced the statement of the former Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski on the possibility of transferring nuclear weapons to Ukraine. The president of the Duma, Vyacheslav Volodin, emphasized that with this statement, the current chamber of the European Parliament incites to a nuclear conflict in the east of Europe. According to the Russian deputy, Sikorski's considerations on the possibility of giving nuclear weapons to Ukraine demonstrate the necessity of the demilitarization of Kiev, as well as the obligation to ensure that the country remains a nuclear weapon-free state. The United States will grant Ukraine $1.5 billion per month over the next few months to support efforts to maintain the Kiev government open. According to Derek Hogan, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Europe, they have already committed $1 billion through diverse mechanisms to be able to provide that assistance, meaning direct budget support, which makes up approximately $1.5 billion per month for the next 4 to 5 months. Later on, Hogan stated that the U.S. is coordinating closely with its G7 partners to strengthen sanctions against Russia over its special military operation in Ukraine. During the special military operation, several countries established sanctions against Moscow, ranging from the partial disconnection of Russia from the SWIFT system, the closure of airspace for Russian airlines, and the freezing of international reserves of the Central Bank of Russia. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Saeed Khatibzadeh said on Monday that the recent anti-Iran resolution adopted by the International Atomic Energy Agency was politically charged and not based on the technical expertise. Such resolution, proposed by the United States, Britain, France, and Germany, accused Iran of non-cooperation. On Thursday, it was announced at Vienna that Iran had told the IAEA it was removing 27 surveillance cameras from its nuclear facilities. Khatibzadeh said Iran's suspension of the part of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on the Iranian nuclear issue is reversible, but in keeping with the negative impact of U.S. sanctions, which appear to be irreversible. He also stressed that Iran's recent shutdown of some monitoring equipment is only a cessation of some voluntary measures and still complies with relevant safeguards agreements previously reached with the IAEA.
Iran's nuclear measures are technically irreversible if the Vienna Agreement is finalized tomorrow, but the economic terrorists and illegal unilateral sanctions imposed on Iran by the US and European countries cannot be reversed, nor can the pain and pressure inflicted on the Iranian people by US politicians, including Donald Trump.
The president of the Lebanese Republic, Michel Aoun, ratified on Monday his country's position to defend the oil and gas resources during the indirect negotiations with Israel to establish the southern maritime border. The Lebanese president emphasized the country's rights are not negotiable and that its will we expressed to the American mediator Amos Hochstein, who will arrive in Beirut on Monday to resume the talks. Aoun stressed that the indirect negotiations with Israel were paralyzed after the rejection of the Lebanese proposal, considering the line drawn by the Army Hydrographic Authority known as Line 29. The President of the Republic expressed hope that talks with the diplomat Hochstein will move the negotiations forward and mentioned the pressures Lebanon faces to avoid investigating in its war of wealth. Now we address other topics. Chinese authorities launched a new mass test on Monday in the most populous district of Beijing after an outbreak of COVID-19 in a bar forced the reimposition of several restrictions. This outbreak, linked to the one particular bar, resulted in the infection of at least 183 people. As a result, authorities again ordered the closure of bars, nightclubs, and karaoke bars in several neighborhoods, including Chaoyang, the epicenter of the outbreak, and delayed the reopening of schools scheduled for Monday. The Chaoyang district, which is home to luxury stores, offices, and embassies, launched mass tests for its 3.5 million residents and millions of employees on Monday. All will have to undergo 3 PCR tests in 3 consecutive days. The Chinese Ministry of Health announced on Monday 143 new cases of COVID-19 in the country. Japanese official sources said on Monday that more than 9 million COVID-19 cases have been registered in the country, after 105,708 patients were diagnosed with the disease last week. The national accumulated death toll rose to 30,905 since the beginning of the global health crisis. As a result of the internal stabilization of the health crisis, the Japanese government continues to relax its border controls. It has raised the daily limit of entries to the national territory from 10,000 to 20,000. It has eliminated the COVID-19 test at airports and the quarantine for passengers from 98 countries considered low risk. And since June 10th, it reopened the borders for small groups of foreign tourists who can tour the country under the supervision of the Japan Tourism Agency and the Japan Association of Travel Agents. And TeleSUR expands its signal with new satellite parameters. Since more than ever, the world connects to us and our stories are being heard in other farther away nations. These parameters are in place since June the 1st in Latin America and the Caribbean, both in English and in Spanish, and quite soon further changes will be implemented for the signals in Europe, the Middle East and Africa. This new multi-platform will continue providing truthful content to oppose the hegemonic media's narrative and our faithfulness to our audience. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.
Un canto por la América Unida. Mira, que lo escuchan ahí arriba. ¡Vamos! Somos la tierra, somos la arcilla, la esperanza que brota y germina. 500 años nos han pisoteado, aquí seguimos, de aquí no nos vamos. América, 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 lindísimo continente se levanta, se levanta, unido que no calla. América, América, lindísimo continente se levanta, unido que no calla. Pueblo latino, vamos pa'lante, tumbando fronteras, somos gigantes, nadie se rinde, vamos para arriba, esa tierra es tuya y también es mía. Pueblo mestizo, guerrero y solidario, aquí nadie es extraño, aquí
abuso. El avia ya la reflorece junto al alba, sigue un solo continente porque rayos nos separa. Con Sucre y Bolívar seguimos pa'lante, pa' encima latino, no hay visa que nos pare.
Desde la Patagonia hasta el Río Bravo, los latinos levantamos la mano. América, lindísima, se levanta, unido que no calla. América, lindísima, se levanta, unido que no calla. México y Bolivia, Puerto Rico libre. Todo el continente latino.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR. Who's moving the chessmen? What interests and motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on TeleSUR. Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, acts as an analysis of political, economic, and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English. A critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The World Today. Mondays on TeleSUR.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
You're watching TeleSUR English. I'm Gladys Quesada, and these are the headlines at this hour. The President of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro Moros, in the framework of his first official visit to Kuwait, met on Tuesday with the incoming Secretary General of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, Kuwait's Haitham Al-Ghais. The Venezuelan head of state, whose country has the largest crude reserves in the world, and Al-Ghais, who will formally take office next August, discussed the direction in which they should work together with the other OPEC member nations, according to official sources. As part of his official activities, the president of the South American nation also met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the president of the Kuwait Economic Fund, Ahmed Nasser Al-Mohamed Al-Sibah. President Maduro arrived in Kuwait with the purpose of expanding bilateral relations at all levels under the principles of mutual respect and self-determination of peoples, with a view to defending multilateralism. On Monday, Ecuadorian security forces repressed indigenous organizations who were demonstrating nationwide in rejection of the economic and social policies of Guillermo Lazo's government. Student movements in the city of Quito denounced that they were repressed by the national police, who used tear gas bombs and blows, warning that their rights and liberties had been violated. The police have also reportedly attacked a group of civil society, students, and social movements demonstrators in the vicinity of a school. The Russian State Duma denounced the statement of the former Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski on the possibility of transferring nuclear weapons to Ukraine. The president of the Duma, Vyacheslav Volodin, emphasized that with this statement, the current member of the European Parliament incites to a nuclear conflict in the east of Europe. According to the Russian deputy, Sikorski's considerations on the possibility of giving nuclear weapons to Ukraine demonstrate the necessity of the demilitarization of Kiev, as well as the obligation to ensure that the country remains a nuclear weapon-free state. And those are the headlines at this hour. For this and more stories, go to our website at telesurenglish.net.
Hello, how are you? Welcome. This is Critical Move. I am Paula Perez. It's a pleasure. For many experts, the People's Summit held in parallel to the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles fulfilled the expectations not only by the attendance but also because of the expressions of unity demonstrated. One of them was to unite with all the oppressed, exploited, and victims of the system whose time is coming to an end. More than 1,000 participants raised their voices in rejection to the policies of a capitalist and predatory model. Amidst the dichotomy of inclusion and exclusion, two summits emerged, that of the peoples and that of Biden and the Organization of American States. The first one unites, the second one divides. Biden and the OAS decided not to invite Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua to their summit, a position that drew criticism and called into question Washington's apparently declining influence in this part of the world. We deploy our board, begin our... The agenda on democratic governance adopted at the Summit of the Americas is unbalanced and based, ignoring diversity as well as political and social pluralism in our region, were part of the criticism of the Biden gathering. The People's Summit for Democracy sent a clear message to U.S. hegemony. Let's review some statements. I was not wrong when I said that I would not be at the Summit of the Americas, but that the voice of Cuba would be there. You are our voice. The revolution always had it clear. Wherever the governments deny us the right to speak, the people will be there to represent us, to speak in our name. This has been the case since the times of the colonies, governments that were pushed by the empire to break off with Cuba and obeyed the master's order, with the honorable exception of Mexico. The Cuban Institute of Friendship with the Peoples was born out of that understanding. Solidarity is not only an inseparable principle of revolutionary practice, it is the most formidable weapon for those of us who believe in the power of the people, in the power of the mobilized peoples, and in the inspiring struggle for social justice. Wherever there are peoples in struggle, there will always be Cuba. Here we are standing in the construction of a different world, a multipolar, multicentric world, a world based on dialogue and respect, on equal treatment of states, of peoples, of governments, a world based on a profound dialogue, a dialogue of cultures, of religions, an inclusive dialogue of ideologies, of positions for a new humanity. A new humanity is necessary. It is being born. A new humanity is possible. Why are we against exclusion? All these countries, obviously Mexico agrees with that position. That is why President López Obrador did not come here to emphasize that we don't agree. I said, why? Because the principle that there can be a legitimate intervention is not accepted. That is, nobody has the right to exclude another country for whatever reason, and even less so because there is a political difference concerning its political regime. What we want for ourselves, what we want for others, and as proud members of the Caribbean community, we expect the same respect for all states in our hemisphere. That includes Cuba and Venezuela. The path of exclusion and sanctions has not been effective in the past and has not brought us any closer to the goal of equitable Americas for the ordinary citizens of our hemisphere, wherever they live. The People's Summit for Democracy was a historic gathering of thousands rejecting Biden's exclusionary policies. Over 100 organizations representing workers, immigrants, women, indigenous, and black people, and LGBTQ plus community, and many other struggling communities came together to share a vision of the future that is inclusive. Let's sum up what is said about the summit in parallel to the America Summit. TeleSUR, the portals, People's Summit calls to fight against imperialism. Organizations, actors, and social activists, managers of the Summit of the Peoples for Democracy, reaffirmed on Friday in a document on the occasion of the closing of the meeting that they are fighting against an empire that is determined to maintain world supremacy, a dangerous illusion that endangers humanity and the planet. Referring to the imperial policy of the United States, the declaration of the event that brought together more than 250 organizations representing workers, immigrants, black and indigenous peoples, and many other communities in resistance stressed that humanity has no choice but to fight. We will be on the streets, in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, and in our homes, constantly building and organizing, carrying out the thousands of small tasks that great struggles that together bring us closer to victory. Our planet needs us, our people need us, and we will win. Valued the meeting, described as historic and in defiance of the policy of exclusion of the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden. Similarly, those present at the regional meeting concluded that the exclusion of countries such as Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua from the summit, where the heads of states of the countries of the hemisphere participate, is part of the vision that puts the political and economic interests of the United States and big business above those of the peoples. Let's place on the map the continent where we focus our attention today. America is the second largest continent on Earth after Asia. It covers a major part of the western hemisphere of the planet. It extends from the Arctic Ocean in the north to the Diego Ramirez Island in the south, at the intersection of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, which it turns border the continent to the east and west, respectively. The Arctic region is an area of several territorial disputes around the world, although only 5 countries share borders: Russia, Canada, Denmark, Norway, and the United States. The strategic importance of the place lies in the possible melting of the North Pole, which would make the Arctic Ocean a navigable passage, something that would shorten the disproportionate distances of the Suez Canal or Cape Town for a shorter northern passage. In addition, the area is rich in energy and mineral reserves. Its surface area comprises a total of 42,549,000 square kilometers, equivalent to about 28.5% of the world's surface area. Its size means that it is geographically and biologically very diverse. It is home to virtually all of the world's climates and several animals and plant species. It is also harbors some of the world's largest rivers and food, energy and mineral resources, including oil, copper, lithium, gold, and silver reserves. The area includes 35 nations and 25 dependent territories. The general characteristics of the industrial and productive composition of the exporting economies are the extraction of natural resources, mostly in the mining and oil industries, manufacturing, and agriculture. According to the World Bank, the economy in terms of purchasing power parity is the third largest and most powerful. We had information with our correspondent, Aiza Garcia from Mexico City, how this process has gone, what conclusions have been reached, and above all, the reactions generated by the strong and clear speeches of several dignitaries at this 9th Summit of the Americas. How are you, Aiza? Thank you for being in this critical move. Welcome. A special greeting to you onto all of the critical move audience. Last week was a very busy week, the People's Summit for Democracy, which was sitting in parallel to the governmental summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, California, and relevant to be held in that city, a city marked by the high number of homeless and indigenous people. We saw it for ourselves. That was the reality that the hosts of the summit could not hide. Many of the 66,400 homeless people in Los Angeles were sleeping and wandering around the convention center, a number that grew by 13% this year and continues to soar due to the vicissitudes of the pandemic that stalks the entire world and was one of the demands we heard at the Summit of the Peoples. The Los Angeles Neighborhood Organization was there, and in every session at this summit, they asked themselves, what is democracy that the United States promotes with more than 600,000 people wandering the streets without being able to eat? That summit also connected with the continent, referring to the Summit of the Peoples, a summit that condemned the 63-year-old U.S. blockade against Cuba, condemned the repeated sanctions against Venezuela, and the exclusion from the official summit of 3 countries on behalf of CELAC. Argentine President Alberto Fernandez called this 9th selective meeting between presidents or foreign ministers and told President Joe Biden face-to-face that the CELAC countries would have light another Summit of the Americas, and said the fact of being host president does not give the United States the ability to impose the right of admission on the countries of the continent, and added Fernandez, the silence of the absentees questions U.S. and certainly the absence of Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua overshadowed the Los Angeles summit, dominated by the criticism of the exclusionary and discriminatory stance of the United States and the OAS. The Biden migration announcements showed that where the highlight of the summit were relegated, showing a deep-rooted skepticism towards the U.S. The presidents of Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala refused to attend, to whom the migration agreement was precisely aimed, but there were more absences, starting with the president of Mexico, who spent weeks pronouncing himself in favor of a real summit with the presence of all and not a meeting of friends or allies of the United States. The strategy of the OAS, whose technically secretariat organized the governmental summit, we saw it, and it is super evidenced. I would like to thank you, Aiza Garcia, for the contextualization and above all for the current news and the reactions that the issue continues to generate. With this, we will mark the first pause in the subject, but not without first reiterating our invitation to you to follow us through our active accounts on the digital platform Twitter. Jugada Crítica. TeleSUR. What impact summit will have on U.S. hegemonic policy of the United States? Participate with us and give us your opinion. When we return, we will submit the issue for analysis. We will be back. Let us see how the United States has taken Latin America at its own backyard, and it has done so not only from the economic point of view, using the region as a laboratory for neoliberalism, but also with a strong military presence. For more than 2 centuries, the United States built the narrative around a common enemy to justify its colonial policy towards Latin America. In 1823, the Monroe Doctrine argued that to counter Europe's imperial ambitions, Washington should extend his influence throughout the continent, hence the phrase America for the Americans, which sums up the essence of the expansionist project. In 1904, President Theodore Roosevelt aimed this plan by establishing that if an European country threatened American interests, that the U.S. would intervene in the affairs of those states to redirect their policies. The idea was the origin of the unilateral and illegal interventions of the White House during the last century, reflected in the national security policy in the 1950s. There are plenty of examples of one of them. In 1954, the president of Guatemala, Jacobo Arbenz, was overthrown in a coup supported by the CIA on the United Fruit Company. In 1973, the president of Chile, Salvador Allende, suffered the same fate in a coup supported by the administration of Richard Nixon. A few years later, military interventions in Grenada and Panama took place, claiming the lives of hundreds of people. In the context of the so-called national security policy, the U.S. also trained 125,000 military personnel in Latin America and the Caribbean between 1950 and 1998. According to data collected by the International Center for the Promotion of Human Rights at the local and regional levels. It also designed the Condor Operation, a campaign of political repression and state terror involving intelligence operations and assassination of opponents in the Southern Cone, to repress progressivism in those countries. An estimated 5,000 people were killed, 30,000 disappeared, and 400,000 imprisoned, according to the so-called Archive of Terror, a compilation of documents on the assassination and political persecution in Paraguay, which also provide details on the crimes against humanity committed at the same time. In the recently declassified documents, U.S. authorities acknowledged that the highest levels of the CIA were aware of the Condor Operation. Analysts argued that the agency's involvement was more direct. The Argentine human rights organization known as Center of Legal and Social Studies detailed that the encrypted communication system used by the civilian and military dictatorships alike was created in a U.S. facility located in the Panama Canal. The White House's attempts to control what it considers its backyard go beyond the economic level by imposing free trade agreements that do not benefit the people, but transactional corporations. Similarly, the alleged security alliances established with neoliberal governments in the region, such as Colombia and Brazil, led to the installation of military bases that justify their presence with a presumed advisory role in the fight against drug trafficking. We are going to submit the subject for analysis. We welcome our guests from Spain. We are joined by Daniel Lobato, internationalist political analyst, and from Ecuador we have Mario Ramos, political analyst. Thank you both for your time for TeleSUR. Welcome to this critical move. I will begin with Daniel Lobato. It is necessary to make a first first analysis of what has been the development of the 9th Summit of the Americas. That is, the organizers had thought that it was going to turn out as so many heads of states asking for the inclusion of countries, advocating for the non-exclusion, and above all, calling on the Biden administration to change its foreign policy. How to qualify the development of the 9th Summit of the Americas? What flavor did it leave us with? Thank you, Paola. Greetings to the viewers. The colonial failure of Joe Biden to sponsor a forum of servile regimes in more than 1/3 of the population of the American continent has been evident. The legitimate representative of more than 200 million Americans have refused to attend such an absurdity, and especially since the moment when the voices were raised. I believe that it was not in his mind that there would be such a massive response from the rest of the countries, and he was already defeated because he had no other alternative. If he had
Welcome back to TeleSUR English. We have the latest updates on the international tour of Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro Moros, as the head of state offers his ending remarks of this visit and his farewells.
Nivel estratégico. Lo vemos a esta hora precisamente durante este recorrido como parte de una fructífera agenda, reuniones que sostuvo en horas de la mañana. Es el agradecimiento profundo a las autoridades del Estado de Kuwait y su admiración profunda por los pueblos árabes y su identidad. Es que también el jefe de Estado venezolano aprovechó estos espacios para coordinar cuáles pueden ser las posibles alianzas entre ambas naciones. Recordemos estas dos potencias energéticas fundadoras.
In this high-level meeting, President of Venezuela Nicolás Maduro Moros arrived for the first time officially in Kuwait as the head of state of the South American nation. In this case, he was received by top officials at the international airport of Kuwait. The President of Venezuela is there to bolster bilateral relations regarding oil production, as well as technology acquisition, agriculture, economy, finance, education, travel, and other fields of action and other fields of economy. Let's listen.
Well, we are concluding this extraordinary visit to the state of Kuwait. We have a mixed commission with cooperation agreements in the areas of politics and diplomatic relationships in the area of oil and gas, a strengthening of OPEC Plus in the area of investment. We have invited private entrepreneurs from Kuwait to take investment into Venezuela in the area of tourism and energy trade to improve and increase trade. We have proposed a project of agricultural production which will be very beneficial for both countries. So actually this, as I was saying to the Prime Minister, this has been a very intense agenda and is very fruitful, which leaves a number of positive results for Venezuela and Kuwait.
We were listening to Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro Moros' farewell remarks as he departed from Kuwait. In that nation, the head of state paid his first official visit to that Asian nation to bolster bilateral ties. Maduro met the incoming OPEC Secretary General Haitham al-Ghais, Kuwait's Prime Minister Sheikh Sabah Khalid al-Hama al-Sabah, the Crown Prince His Highness Michal al-Ahmad al-Jaber al-Sabah, as well as other top officials and authorities. The head of state referred to both nations' intentions to cooperate in agriculture and oil production, as well as to bolster relations in other areas. Also, as we know, the head of state was upcoming from Iran. Also, he visited Turkey and he visited Algeria, all allied nations where he were to bolster relations and also to enhance these bilateral ties in the face and in the wake of the U.S. sanctions and other Western nations' pressure and interference actions. We have more details in upcoming news briefs. Stay with us.
Rejecting the capitalist model that continues to be imprinted by the hegemonic policy of the United States. Especially, I want to ask you how you position politically Joe Biden in the face of the criticism that has arisen not only from the groups that have come together in Los Angeles at this summit for the rights of people, but also from their own militias who already rejected the fact that they had not invited even Cuba, nor Nicaragua, nor Venezuela to the summit of the Americas. That is a summit that has also been described as the summit of Biden. a conclave that was only trying, in quotes, to make the democratic administration look good, when in reality, in fact, it was totally the opposite. What will be the repercussions in the upcoming midterm elections? What would it be? Good morning, greetings to all. Well, it is very significant and symbolic that a summit of the peoples has been held in the middle of the Biden summit. The presence of more than 200 organizations, black movements of migration, etc., and despite the absence of Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, that absence has shone with its own light, and it has been a ghost that has haunted the summit. But the voice of these countries has resonated with much more force. So we see the isolation of Biden, an isolation of the U.S. government, and it has been widely noted with more strength this need to create and to strengthen our own organism of integration, the need to get rid of this neo-colonial instrument that is the OAS. I've seen precisely that the Chancellor Maita had pointed out that he doesn't see the need. They are obliged to remain in this type of organization. But I think there is a lot of indecision despite of the coup d'etat of the OAS in Bolivia. I think there is a lot of indecision that is not understood in the geopolitical context and in all its dimensions that currently exists. And it will be an important step for Bolivia to exit the OAS. I see that the Chancellor mentioned that there is hope of forming a MARC, but it is the instrument that was born with the colonial spirit, and that instrument will never be reformed. So it is better to leave the OAS and strengthen our own organizations that have been created like the CELAC. In the current multipolar world, the only way we can play it on the international board is by strengthening our civilization. We are not the West. The West is not a geographical concept. The West is more than a geographical pressure. Us, even though we are in the Western world, are not the West. We have our own culture, our own history, our own regional interests, and when we speak geopolitically, we are talking about geopolitics, war, intelligence, international relations, strategy. We must develop an active strategy, and part of that active strategy is to get out of the OAS and to strengthen our instruments. In this sense, I insist that the Summit of the Peoples has been very symbolic and significant. In the middle of the empire in which it is important as Los Angeles, this Summit of the Peoples develops, and they are created with certainty that is spreads with more paradoxically uncertain, and I repeat, the voice of the absent countries. I think that the decadence of the empire is evident. Social movements to leave that school of thought. In that frame, I think there's something that we have to take into account, is to leave that school of thoughts of the plan that is why left-wing liberalism, and resuming the practice of the agenda of struggle with other peoples that is against imperialism, the creation of a participatory democracy. the creation of popular power without obviously ceasing to raise it. Others, I have these important ones, but we have to go to the root of what we think, that our own thoughts, that revolutionary thoughts created by our thinkers, by our fighters of these decades. So I believe that in the current multipolar international context, it is important that we take our own strategic thinking. We make many of our own in America. I think that Biden, it is important to put into context, because in the political and economic crisis framework that the United States is suffering, the context of this conflict in Ukraine, it is very important in that sense of values that are going to lose the elections. And the political crisis of the states will get worsened. And we see that they want to drag us, and they want to sustain their interests. They definitely tried in 2015 in Argentina, in that summit in Mar del Plata. But this has no longer been developed. We have consolidated El Alba, but more important steps must be taken to continue developing this multipolar vision in accordance with our regional interests and consolidate our exploration fights like against criminals. I think that Biden and Democrats are going to lose direction. They have very clear their interests, their imperialistic interests. There is the Secretary of Mayor Mario Ramos around this issue that also comes into our attention in our analysis. The truth is that there is a progress. There are steps. Now I ask Daniel Lobato, two summits that mark in guidelines different in addition to diversified topics aimed at maintaining hegemony by the side of the Summit of the Americas, according to the agenda, that in addition the migration issue was going to be, let's say, the key point of the meeting, but that in the end it was totally overshadowed by the demand for the exclusion of the countries that were not invited into it, and the Summit of the Peoples that has marked a new roadmap, especially marked in solidarity, a fact that has transcended borders and that has even forced some corporate media to review it. So, it is good. To continue with what we were explaining, it is necessary to understand that here there is a 200 years long confrontation. The year that it will be 200 years since the Monroe Doctrine is coming, the one for which precisely Joe Biden said that the Latin American was the backyard. But when he considered it this way, it was the front yard, with the definite that Latin America and the U.S. was not lateral or rear front. The question is that there is a clash of two hegemonies or two struggles from two completely opposing interests of the imperial power, and the peoples who do not want to be subrogated and who have two completely different agendas. That is to say, Latin America and the Caribbean have a very different agenda with ALBA, with CELAC, etc., and a very different doctrine from the United States. There is a basic incompatibility. I have already said that there is an interest on the part of the United States, which is to lose the territory, deploy the resources control the resources, and that in addition to those countries, North American products are a slave market, and that the workers are also cheap labor hands or semi-slaves for that great American factory that is now in decline. And we have seen the reverse fight for sovereignty, the fight for the creation of democratic bodies, democratic jurisdictions. For example, ALBA has brought to light how in 2005, Hugo Chavez, Lula, and Nestor Kirchner shot precisely at a summit of the Americas. They knocked down the ALCA, not that the free trade proposal of enslavement and colonization of the American peoples by the North American president. We are very clear that the United States has a very clear agenda of trying to dismantle, destroy any attempt at genuine integration. We have seen that even as the blows to dismantle the ALBA, the coup against Honduras, the soft coup of Lenin Moreno from Ecuador, and how then both countries were taken out of the ALBA, both Honduras and we have seen how as soon as the peoples have the opportunity of the new restaurant, their sovereignty towards regional integration free from the U.S., and we have seen the return of Bolivia to that all-axis imperialist. When it comes to the peoples, they have the slightest opportunity to express themselves freely. So in that expression of the poles, we have seen the counter summit, as it is the summit of the peoples, more than 250 organizations that have met in parallel to that force of the summit of the Americas. I'm firmly postulating that is the time for the peoples, that is to say, it is the time for that agenda of the Latin American, Caribbean countries, completely different there, and antagonist to the North American agenda. And an agenda, of course, not the impositions, not to the vetoes, not to the colonialism or neocolonialism, and above all, expressing several axes on sovereignty that we have touched on a little earlier. Also has not said unlimited sovereignty to threaten neighboring countries or be a puppet of aggression by the empire against countries or neighboring towns, how some other regimes behave, like the Colombia, etc. This is an expression that sustained us in the 60s or 70s with the most genuine internationalism with Cuba, with Angola, Namibia, etc., Mozambique. And of course, international human rights, the chart of the United Nations, to whip with it the regimes on the part of the West according to the interests, has been a genuine chart of the universal rights. And we have also seen in these 2 years of pandemic that precisely our universal rights has been used as weapon of war, the right of health or universal right of women to women's freedom, that as long as they are not free, the rest of humanity, the 50% of humanity is not free. We will not be free. In order, an anti-imperialist is giving an enormous wealth of proposals, and it will be like that in the future. It's a seed of new ideas to combat imperialism, which is going to intensify as the U.S. has more pronounced decline as it is having in its hegemony in Asia, in the East, in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, with us we've seen pushing their European puppets with the sacrifice of the Ukrainian people for the neocolonial interests of the United States in Eastern Europe. So that decline, if that decline continues, it will also accentuate against China in the Sea of China, and it will already, well, probably United States, the empire, sets its sides even more aggressively against what Monroe considered that doctrine. the ideas of the peoples of the ALBA and CELAC and all of these forums, they have to be very, very solid, very robust to face that task that will come for sure. I want to thank you, Daniel Lobato, for these clarifications that are not understood, not only for the impact that the development of this summit and for the democracy of the people has had, but also to what point above in the non-binding conclusions. Let us remember from the 9th Summit of the Americas that has been held in Los Angeles without the countries of the Americas, because it has to be said and towards the end of the claim for the heads of states and government representatives who have attended this meeting. Let's mark the second pause in our critical move. In it, we share our strategic move with the invitation to follow us through our active Twitter accounts. What impact summit will have on U.S. hegemonic policy? Wait for us. We will be back. We are going to deepen the analysis. From Mexico is accompanying us Aribel Contreras, coordinator of the Global Business degree at the Ibero-American University of Mexico. What a pleasure to have you here with us, and thanks for your time. Aribel, to the contrary, to see you is always a pleasure to be able to share with you, with the entire audience on your program, well, these international impacts of the events, daily events that, well, they are very attentive. Regarding the impact of that, I would like to talk to you about, we are going to break down a little bit about the agreements reached in the first part of the 9th Summit of the Americas, what it has been called, which has been called the Biden Summit. What to understand from this? Your question is very provocative, and I totally agree. In fact, I wrote several articles last week where I said that I wonder if this was really the summit of Biden, since on one hand, as a host country, it determined who was active in the second, given because it really, in reality, the agenda was raised from the White House without asking for the opinion, so that it could be a truly hemispheric agenda. Paula, that is to say, that progress could be made towards hemispheric solutions in the face of hemispheric problems, but it seems that in light of what we saw during these during the 5 days, but already on Friday when the commitment to the migratory agreement is signed, I say, well, then you will find the summit of Americas in the position that in reality the Central Axis was the priority of the United States, which was how the rest of the countries joined this ship where the United States wants it to save $300 million, so that the rest of the countries are this invisible wall to contain migration, and that the Biden summit should not cause a problem for the American Union, because in this year of midterm elections, what he's looking for without a doubt is to pay and have political capital, because he knows that this date of November 8th, where his party will lose seats, is getting closer and closer to the Biden summit, because he arrives at this summit with the lowest approval of his entire administration, 40.8% of approval, the lowest level that have been seen not only in the Biden mandate, but in any American president since the time of the Second World War. The Biden summit, because it is the nothing. We saw that at this moment, this attempt to give drone kicks where USA channels is clearer that it has lost its influence in these natural areas, because it has lost the attention of admiring Latin America and the Caribbean, even out of the corner of the eye. United States has forgotten and has isolated this region to be able to invest in infrastructure, projects while the United States has forgotten and left aside the region. And now that it seems that the tenant of the White House has realized the need to create bridges. Now, what caught our attention is that we are talking about the fact that it's not possible to implement the declaration of the 9th Summit of the Americas, a real hemispheric impact, even more when the countries that have or suffer from problems such as immigration are not part of the meeting, and above all, the fact of allocating such a large amount of money in the midst of the elections that are notified only to endorse their internal policy. That is to say that they're actually stripping the organization, whether the administration of Biden has been good or bad at this summit, beyond that which qualified as a total political kick. Totally. We are seeing that when we compare the first summit that was held in the city of Miami, a summit that was very exciting on the part of the organizers, were late for the award ceremony, they would have an inclusive list, although it was obvious that Cuba was missing. However, throughout the summit, Paula was been seeing that in the 8 previous editions had seen different non-signatories. In 2015, Cuba was finally included, and it seemed that it was important to be able to really listen to plural voices in a forum. There may be political differences of ideology and economic models, but the world was already changing. In 2018, it was the then U.S. president who did not attend. So now we are left to say, giving brushstrokes to this new scenario, because the Summit of the America has not adapted to the new context and the situation that Latin America and the Caribbean are not experiencing, a very acute affectation by the pandemic, and even worse now with the consequences of a war whose train crash we know perfectly well is between the U.S. and Russia. It seems that this Summit of the America goes beyond the controversial political issue that has arisen. I ask myself, well then, where is this part in which we are looking for this shelter, and this is this umbrella for talking about democracy and human rights, when it is the same United States that is now facing a process of public hearings to be able to have an illegal configuration to evaluate the facts that happened precisely on January 6th of last year, that tried to find democracy. That on one hand, you have to be critical and judged, but on the other hand, we have to see what is happening within the same nation. Response to these demands for non-inclusion of hemispheric policies that manage to resolve the neurologic problems, that a summit that has not addressed nuclear issues, that is, deep ones, not nuclear from atomic, nuclear from deep ones. A real situation of the countries in this part of the continent. This is due to the birth of these summits parallel to this summit, for example, in defense of the rights of the peoples. And finally, I would like to know your conclusion regarding these summits parallel to the Summit of the Peoples that are becoming stronger and stronger, not only because of the number of the participants, but also because of the profound issues that are being addressed. All this try to reverse not only the violation of human rights, but the fact that there are laws that protect the environment, gender rights, and among other diversities that are not even touched some heads of states, and that they only form strategic alliances with or the one that we saw the meeting of Biden with Bolsonaro days ago in Brazil. As you say, Paula, I think that the Summit of the Peoples takes place in parallel since 2005 to the Summit of the Americas. Is the reflection and the sample of what it means that death Summit of the Americas has always left us to see as civil society, the Summit of the Peoples, that is a young person space where the voices of the non-governmental organizations, the movements of peasants, workers, is a truly plural forum that arises from the society with the way that those voices are heard, where solutions are effectively sought. One is here. We see very well the issue of climate change that has had an impact to the whole world. What is happening, for example, in the Amazon. The Amazon is facing a great diversity of indigenous people, but also great challenges due to the issue of climate change, since it reduces its current president, who is skeptical of the entire position of the climate market, since it is precisely the Summit of the Peoples where it is online. And if an agenda is drawing up, where not only is it heard, but that there will also be a place, a forum, where there are commitments from these organizations, where they can advance from their perspective that democracy, which is respect for human rights, from their perspective, as it is that effectively they have to advance collaboratively together, to that they have roots and be able to advance through this Summit of the Peoples, that in reality the peoples see themselves as brother peoples, work hand in hand, and to combat, I insist, not only on the issue of climate change, but vital. They are looking for formulas to face the food crisis that is already approaching, where countries like Argentina, which is a great agriculture producer, how it is that it could join beyond the reflectors. There are no concrete actions, but this the Summit of the Peoples, they have the advance, and the more important is that they have a struggle where there are no political issues and in realities of the society. Because where the balance is measured with the different purposes and objectives, the greater good over the individual, not like in other summits where the individual good surpasses the greater. I want to thank you, Aribel Contreras, for having accompanied with us in this analysis, for putting the edges on the table and understanding the impact that the Summit of the Peoples will have on the hegemony and the hegemonic policy in reality of the USA. This is how today's program ends, so we close our Geopolitical board. See you next time.
Un canto por la América Unida. Mira, que lo escuchan allá arriba. ¡Vamos! Somos la tierra, somos la arcilla, la esperanza que brota y germina. 500 años nos han pisoteado, aquí seguimos, de aquí no nos vamos. América, 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 lindísimo continente se levanta, olvido que no calla. América, América, lindísimo continente se levanta, olvido que no calla. Pueblo latino, vamos para adelante, tumbando fronteras, somos gigantes, nadie se rinde, vamos para arriba, esa tierra es tuya y también es mía. Pueblo mestizo, guerrero y solidario, aquí nadie es extraño, aquí somos hermanos. Todos los países digan presente, Venezuela y Cuba presente, Nicaragua, Honduras presente, el Caribe entero. América, América, se levanta, pueblo unido que no calla, no se detiene. América, 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 se levanta, pueblo unido que no calla.
Soy Pacatari, soy hueca impuro, 5 siglos resistiendo el atropello y el abuso. El avia ya la reflorece junto al alba, sigue un solo continente porque rayos nos separa. Con Sucre y Bolívar seguimos pa'lante, pa' encima latino, no hay visa que nos pare.
Desde la Patagonia hasta el Río Bravo, los latinos levantamos la mano. América, 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 lindísima.
follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR. Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, acts as an analysis of political, economic, and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English. A critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The World Today. Mondays on TeleSUR. It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR. Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
El mundo se mueve constantemente y todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos. Se mueve la geopolítica mundial. Nos preguntamos qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento, cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan. Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR.
You're watching TeleSUR English. I'm Gladys Quesada, and these are the headlines at this hour. On his first official visit of Venezuelan President to Kuwait, Nicolás Maduro was welcomed at the Royal Palace, where he met with the country's first minister and other government officials. President Maduro was accompanied by Celia Flores de Maduro and by his government ministers. This is a necessary tour to reactivate work relations, cooperation in these historic times, where a new multi-centered world is being forged. Upon arriving on the Royal Palace, Maduro exalted great sympathy for the Arab nations and deep bonds of brotherhood. Both Venezuela and Kuwait are OPEC founding countries since 1960. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, expected to last for the next 200 years. Meanwhile, Venezuela's gas reserves, which are undergoing a certification process, may rank the second in the world, and Venezuela is the #1 in gold and diamond ores, and it also has large reserves as iron and bauxite. On Monday, Ecuadorian security forces repressed indigenous organizations who were demonstrating nationwide in rejection of the economic and social policies of Guillermo Lazo's government. Student movements in the city of Quito denounced that they were repressed by the national police, used tear gas bombs and blows, warning that the rights and liberties had been violated. The police have also reportedly attacked a group of civil society, students, and social movements demonstrators in the vicinity of a school. The Russian State Duma denounced the statement of the former Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski, the possibility of transferring nuclear weapons to Ukraine. The president of the Duma, Vyacheslav Volodin, emphasized that with this statement, the current member of the European Parliament incites to a nuclear conflict in the east of Europe. According to the Russian deputy, Sikorski's considerations on the possibility of giving nuclear weapons to Ukraine demonstrate the necessity of the demilitarization of Kiev, as well as the obligation to ensure that the country remains a nuclear weapon-free state. And those are the headlines at this hour. For this and more stories, go to our website at telesurenglish.net.
Over the last few years, we've witnessed the rise of two disturbing phenomena in the United States. One, the rise of mass shootings. Just 1 year ago in Las Vegas, the deadliest in modern history, 58 people were mercilessly gunned down from a hotel window, with hundreds left injured. The conversation of gun control occupies a few days of media space and then goes away until the next mass shooting.
At least 58 people.
More than 20 people are dead.
Shooting rampage in Tehama County.
And has gone on a killing spree.
At least 17 people have been killed.
The shooter has on body armor.
Gunman opened fire at a Waffle House.
He used his dad's shotgun.
There are multiple fatalities.
At a video game tournament.
3 victims killed.
Bakersfield tonight following a shooting spree.
3 people have been killed in that mass shooting.
Shooting at a Kroger grocery store.
12 people who have been shot.
Shooting at a yoga studio.
Killing at least 12 people.
If that weren't terrifying enough, this coincides with the resurgence of the neo-Nazi and white supremacist movement, itself heavily armed and calling for violence. Sometimes the two trends overlap. But America's addiction to guns, the mass shooting epidemic, and the burgeoning armed right wing are much more deeply connected than is being acknowledged. And if either threat is to be solved or even diminished, there must be an honest analysis of U.S. history and culture. So I met with scholar Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz, who just wrote a new book, Loaded, A Disarming History of the Second Amendment, to find out how we got here, or if we've always been this way. So before we get into the history, Roxanne, as we sit down for this interview, there have been 3 far right-wing attacks just in the last week. We had a white supremacist shooting 2 black Americans at a Kroger store. Then we had the pipe bombs sent to prominent Democrats. And of course, just yesterday, this horrific shooting at the synagogue that left 11 people murdered. Of course, there have also been many more hate crimes as of late and an increase under the Trump administration. What is your reaction to this wave of violence?
Well, it does seem like it's accelerated, the ideological ones. You can say before we had clearly, some problematic people like Cho at Virginia Tech, the young man who was at Sandy Hook. There seems to be more ideological right-wing nationalism that has a platform now with Trump. He uses their code words, their language, including the okay thing and the anti-Semitic globalism and attacking Soros. And this is just, just the code. So I think in the general public, we think it's stupid or we think it's wrong or even right-wing, but we don't necessarily jump to saying that's hate language. But the people who are in these white nationalist organizations they of course know and they applaud, you know.
Okay, I don't know anything about what you're even talking about with white supremacy or white supremacists. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Did he endorse me?
Okay, I mean, I'm just talking about David Duke and the Ku Klux Klan here, but
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know David Duke. I don't believe I've ever met him.
They have a word. It sort of became old-fashioned. It's called a nationalist. And I say, really, we're not supposed to use that word. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? They'll go to a person holding a sign who gets paid by Soros or somebody, right? That's what happens. We must replace the present policy of globalism and replace it with a new policy, America first. Remember that. We are not going to let the United States be taken advantage of anymore. I am always going to put America first, the same way that I expect all of you in this room to put your countries first. From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. It's going to be only America first. America first.
They've never been really quite as triumphant since the 1920s, when the Klan had got about 3 million people as members and voted, and actually marched on Fifth Avenue, 1 million of them. So that, you know, that was in that buildup of time to state fascism. It really looks like the same kind of thing. And I think if we step back from the obvious trauma and horror of it all and seemingly irrationality, and how did we get here, we have to understand the trajectory of capitalism, and when it no longer has a use, which has been now about a century, you know, if it had any use, but let's give it that it had these amazing ability to take better care of humanity. Well, it lost that possibility. It spun out. You know, it was really no longer. It was artificial after that. It was built up by you notice how every day we watch. The main news is watching, like, you know, these barometers of the stock market and the job. This wasn't necessary under thriving, buoyant capitalism, which depended on looting and colonialism. When colonialism, formal colonialism, ended, this was very traumatic to, and it began ending in the 1920s. The writing was on the wall for colonialism. So capitalism tends to become fascism when it no longer has something to really offer, say, most of the people. So I think we need to dig deeper into, you know, how these patterns go, and then also just into the history of the United States. It's been building up, and you can look back and see the tendencies in the 80s, a huge surge under Reagan of white nationalist organizations forming, a resurgence of the Klan, attracting lots and lots of disaffected young street kids, white kids, who are now, you know, in charge of these organizations.
You mentioned Trump's dog whistles constantly to these people, and I'm glad that you brought up the rhetoric because, you know, let's just say Charlottesville, for example, saying there's good people on both sides, couldn't even condemn neo-Nazis that had killed someone. And then we move on to the MAGA bomber, right, this attempted bombing of these prominent Democrats. Trump's reaction to that was very telling as well. He essentially blamed the media itself for inciting this. Why do you think Trump is doing this, Roxanne?
I do think, or I've heard, apparently there's some documentation that he had Mussolini's translation of Mussolini on his bedstand, you know, that he has studied how others have done this. And he's probably also, you know, I mean, they say he doesn't read, but I think he probably does read things like that. He has embodied this, and I think he has his own instincts, and he's been acting it out as a real estate man. You know, it's interesting for me observing Trump's behavior every day and the way he's made his money and all, and he's so much like a. I mean, people are kind of shocked when I say this, like George Washington. You know, this real estate crook that was taking, with militias going out and surveying Indian land, and then coming back and selling it. And he didn't own it. It was, you know, but he made pieces of paper and sold it. And that's how he started that when he was 22 years old. And he became very, very wealthy on real estate. Of course, he also had slaves and a plantation, but this was his main work. And so these real estate men actually started the United States because they were all into real estate. Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson. Washington was the oldest and best one to develop it. And what that did was develop capitalism, being the first, you know, U.S. being the first capitalist state, formed as such on Lockean principles, actually developed on real estate, which is unusual. It didn't, you know, on the selling of land. The sacredness of the land for the settler is its value. You know, it's to sell it, to buy it, to sell it, to turn it over, because that's how capitalism works. You have to keep turning it over. You don't want people just to have something and just enjoy it the rest of their lives. So I think there's so much in our culture that really is available to a fascist kind of formation. It doesn't have to be that way, but because it's so dependent on the idea of anyone can make it, you know, that the playing field is level. Not everyone's equal, but they have equal opportunity. And that's always been a lie, but it's never more so than now, you know, with the income inequality. That has to somehow be maintained.
In a way, Trump is kind of the perfect manifestation of what America really represents, from being the top landlord to the reality star obsession to, you know, this language that we're talking about, Roxanne. It's all predicated on deep-rooted white supremacist, settler colonial
We're
mentality.
back to the beginning.
We're back to the beginning. Let's go back, because history's gun culture is based on the Second Amendment, right? The Second Amendment's right to bear arms, to have a well-regulated militia. What does that mean? I mean, first of all, talk about America's gun culture and why the Second Amendment was in the Bill of Rights.
Yeah, the gun culture already existed when the United States became independent. In the colonies, Virginia and Massachusetts Bay were the big colonies in the early 16th century. And in the 1620s, even the 20s, the 30s, 40s, they made gun laws. It's interesting, they made gun laws in those colonies that every settler, male, had to have a firearm and a certain amount. They actually had amounts, like so many pounds of gunpowder and so many bullets to load. And they were not to leave their house without their weapons or be in any public place, including church, without their firearms. And this was in the 1600s. They had no other enemy than the Indians whose land they had taken, who were still on their periphery, and they were wanting to take more of that land. So this was purely made, this Second Amendment, this was practiced throughout. The requirement kind of morphed into a right. There was, you know, this sense that the the only way to take land away from people who are resisting, who are on it and resisting, is by counterinsurgency. By, what counterinsurgency is not fighting soldiers, but killing civilians, burning their crops, burning their villages, cutting off their roads, their ability to move, raping and maiming, and the highest level of violence is possible to drive people out, those who are survive this mayhem. And armies, they actually weren't big enough. They couldn't get enough, the idea of getting enough soldiers to do what individual settlers could do by their own desire, not being required or conscripted, but their desire to take that land. Because once they took it, it was theirs.
So gun rights were never for all Americans?
They weren't. They were for a purpose. They're autonomous settlers organizing themselves with a clear purpose to take land and get rich. So that's the dance, of the government. Then they somehow wanted to put some restrictions, and yet they didn't want to. They knew they would still need the settlers because they already had this perspective of, going to the Pacific Ocean. They had the maps already mapped out in the Northwest Ordinance. So I think, the Second Amendment was simply a validation of what already existed, these militias that already existed and the slave patrols that already existed. It's like you don't give that up, that sense of being a settler and having those rights. That's really what white nationalism is. It's the settler's right for priority. And they talk in terms of welcoming, proper immigrants, but they're always the other, unless they can culturally, come to be the settler, have that mentality. And there are all these books on how this or that group became white, how Jews became white, how Italians became white, how the Irish became white. But it's really how they became settlers. The more they can express that white nationalism and be with it, the more likely they are to be kind of accepted in it. And that's a process going on now. And so it's really available to anyone. You still call it white nationalism, but it's still, it can take other people in now. It's not just white people.
So there's this revered history of militias in general. I mean, there's even high school mascots of militia people across this country. But you're talking about the real history of what these militias did. I wanted you to expand on that. And also, how did they manifest into organizations like the KKK?
So in the in the colonies, like the Massachusetts Bay Colony, these vicious militias who would, go and burn the crops and burn the storage places for food. And these were all farmers. The native people east of the Mississippi, they were all farmers. They were out, out in the woods hunting. They had villages and everything. So they were very vulnerable to, when they got to the plains, it's a different thing. People who were herdsmen or were nomadic and not so easy to burn there because they could move fast. They could change places. But east of the Mississippi was just like Ireland, of just farmers and villages to burn down. So they really used those same methods. So that was like from 1607 to independence, 1785. That's a long period of time that they formed these things. But you could have a good understanding of how they worked as slave patrols. I mean, a very vivid, clear line. They worked this way with Native people too, but people know less about that history. But the militias that were slave patrols in the South were textbook militias. They were not paid. They're voluntary militias. They're not the same as constables, you know, what we call police now, to police the white population. They were purely for, you know, to inspect any stray black person, especially a stray black young man. And this tells you what, you know, how the police connection today is assumed to be a fugitive, a runaway, unless they can prove otherwise. During the Cotton Kingdom, they would post all over, even all over the North, any escaped slave and with the Dred Scott decision, every citizen, every white citizen, had the obligation to turn that person in. So in a way, they made everyone a part of the slave patrols. Because the whole culture revolved around controlling the enslaved Africans. So when the Civil War came, these militias continued as best they could, you know, to keep slaves from running away, to, you know, and the war built up and that became difficult, but they didn't ever disband as slave patrols. What happened is 6 months after the end of the Civil War, before really Reconstruction got going, the Ku Klux Klan formed. What they did was reassemble the slave patrols all over the South, but they were now illegal, so they put hoods on. But one general said about halfway through Reconstruction, he said, the Klan is so pervasive in all of the former Confederate states that it would take 10 times as many divisions of the U.S. Army that exists to control them. And everyone said, that's amazing. How did they organize so fast? How did they do that? Well, they were already organized. They were militias with hoods on. And then with Reconstruction, I mean, when the Union Army left, they took the hoods off and became the sheriffs and the police and the convict, you know, the jail keepers. And this is then the formation of modern police forces. It's like a DNA, you know, a social DNA that goes back to the slave patrols. Now, the analogy to that that's more complicated because people don't know that much about, you know, the Indian Wars and the indigenous people are still here and have a land base, is that, you know, in the center of that is like Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Wyoming, that area, and the eastern part of Oregon and Washington is this, is kind of the heartland of the descendants of the Indian militias. They run their cattle on federal land because almost all that land in that area is federal land. And the reason it's federal land is it was never legally taken from the native nations by treaty. It was simply occupied. So legally they can't privatize it. They can't sell it. So it's like 3/4 of the land in those states and also in New Mexico is federal land. But they lease, you know, they lease for mining, they lease for, you know, uranium mining, copper mining, coal mining. They just refuse to repatriate that land to the native people because they want to do away with reservations, but legally they don't know how they can do it because when they're created by treaty, they can't do it. So this is, these militias, these rural militias, they call them, are, you know, mostly really wealthy landowners in the West, not your ordinary, you know, like the image of, you know, just some rednecks who hate Indians. It's really a wealthy class of people, well-to-do. They're very sparsely populated, and they have 2 senators, each of them, just like we do in California as the most populous state.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR. Who's moving the chessmen? What interests and motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on TeleSUR. Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, acts as an analysis of political, economic, and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English. A critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The World Today. Mondays on TeleSUR.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
It is our duty to reverse the damage we caused to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR.
The president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro Moros, concluded his official visit to Kuwait as he continues his international tour. Ecuadorian security forces repressed indigenous organizations who were demonstrating nationwide in rejection of the economic and social policies of Guillermo Lazo's government. Their leader, Leonidas Issa, was arrested on early Tuesday morning. The Russian State Duma denounces the statement of the former Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski on the possibility of transferring nuclear weapons to Ukraine. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. On this first official visit to Venezuelan President to Kuwait, Nicolás Maduro was welcomed at the Royal Palace, where he met with the country's first minister and other government officials. The Venezuelan head of state paid his first official visit to that Asian nation to bolster bilateral ties. During this occasion, Maduro met the incoming OPEC Secretary General Haitham Al-Ghais, Kuwait's Prime Minister Sheikh Sabah Khalid Al-Hama Al-Sabah, the Crown Prince, His Highness Michel Al-Hamad Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, as well as other top officials and authorities. In his farewell remarks, Maduro referred to both nations' intentions to cooperate in agriculture and oil production, as well as to bolster relations in other areas. At the end of his first official visit to the state of Kuwait, the president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro Moros, highlighted the agreements made during his meetings with high government officials from the Middle East nation.
We decided to activate a high-level joint commission with specific plans for cooperation in political and diplomatic fields, to continue intensive cooperation in the oil and gas industries, and to strengthen OPEC. Concerning investments, we invited the Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development and private businessmen to invest in Venezuela in the fields of tourism, energy, and trade.
The president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro Moros, in the framework of his first official visit to Kuwait, met on Tuesday with the incoming Secretary General of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, Kuwait's Haitham Al-Ghais. The Venezuelan head of state, whose country has the largest crude reserves in the world, and Al-Ghais, who will formally take office next August, discussed the direction in which they should work together with the other OPEC member nations, according to official sources. As part of his official activities, the president of the South American nation also met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the president of the Kuwait Economic Fund, Ahmed Nasser Al-Mohamed Al-Sabah. President Maduro arrived in Kuwait with the purpose of expanding bilateral relations at all levels under the principles of mutual respect and self-determination of the peoples, with a view to defending multilateralism. Now we move on to other topics. A group of armed individuals stole 20 containers with gold, silver, and electronic devices on June 5th from a private property in the vicinity of the port of Manzanillo in the Mexican state of Colima. Local authorities report that 12 to 15-man commando allegedly arrived at the facilities of the Maniobras Alfonso Mireles company. After midnight, subdued the caretaker, the supervisors, and some forklift operators, locked them in a booth, and then committed the robbery by transporting the merchandise in tractor trailers. Authorities are still checking the surrounding area, mostly from private companies, to find the perpetrators of the robbery. The president of the Argentinian Association of Mothers of Plaza de Mayo, Hebe de Bonafini, expressed on Monday her solidarity with the Colombian people and urged them to exercise the right to vote in order to build a better Latin America. In a letter published in the association's social network profiles, Bonafini described the elections as hopeful and affirmed that with the vote many things are possible. The social activist wrote that she felt the triumph was near and urged those who did not believe that it was possible to have a president like Petro and who thought that it was an unrealizable dream to go to the polls. Bonafino reiterated the association's obligations to build together a free Latin America and sentenced that the only fight that is lost is the one that is abandoned. Brazil is awaiting the experts' report on two bodies found in the Amazon that could correspond to Don Phillips, collaborator of the British media The Guardian, and Bruno Pereira, Brazilian indigenist, both missing from a week. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Ignacio Lemus, with the details.
Last June the 5th, British journalist Don Phillips and indigenous activist Bruno Pereira disappeared in the Vale do Javari, a reserve in the Brazilian Amazon, near the border with Colombia and Peru. Both were interviewing indigenous communities affected by the invasion of extractive industries.
The government of Mr. Jair Bolsonaro is directly responsible for this situation of increased violence against the indigenous peoples of Brazil, for acting as a government by encouraging those sectors that cause deforestation illegal mining, exploitation of water resources, and the eviction of indigenous peoples from these territories for the advancement of agribusinesses, mainly in the Brazilian Amazon.
The indigenous communities of Vale do Javari are asking for justice. Bruno Pereira was threatened for collaborating in the defense of indigenous territories abandoned by the Brazilian government. The former official of the government entity for indigenous protection, FUNAI, was exonerated by the Ministry of Justice of the Bolsonaro government in 2019. During the administration of the then Minister Sergio Moro, former judge in the Lava Jato case. The reason? Bruno Pereira denounced illegal miners in an operation that ended with the destruction of 60 rafts of invaders. In other words, he was expelled for doing his job well, and although he had served for 23 years, the Brazilian president considered him to be improvised.
Only 2 people on a boat in a region like that, completely wild, is an adventure that is not recommended.
In 2019, Don Phillips had questioned Bolsonaro's anti-environmental policies.
New deforestation numbers show a scary increase. IBAMA is finding less and carrying out fewer operations. The signals that the government is giving to Europe this week are not positive in the sense of environmental protection. For example, the Minister of Environment was in Rondonia this week, together with deforesters. How the President intends to convince and show the world that the government is really concerned about the preservation of the Amazon. First, you have to understand that the Amazon belongs to Brazil, not to you. I repeat here, we preserve more than the whole world. No country in the world has the morals to talk about the Amazon.
The Supreme Court determined that the government should take all possible measures to find the journalist and the indigenous man and gave a period of 5 days for the actions to be detailed. Bolsonaro stated that dozens of people disappear every day and that the Supreme Court does not care about it. The disappearance had global repercussions. The United Nations qualified the searches as extremely slow.
We stress our concerns as to the wider context of constant attacks and harassment faced by human rights defenders, environmentalists, and journalists in Brazil.
Don Phillips' wife confirmed to the press on Monday that the embassy had confirmed that the 2 bodies found in Vale do Javari were those of the journalist and the indigenous man. But the federal police and the indigenous teams in the region denied the discovery. According to a report to the NGO Global Witness published in 2021, Brazil is the 4th country in murders of environmental defenders.
Ignacio Lemos y Julia Nassif para TeleSUR.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on TeleSUR.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
Welcome back. On Monday, Ecuador's security forces repressed indigenous organizations who were demonstrating nationwide in rejection of the economic and social policies of Guillermo Lazo's government. Student movements in the city of Quito denounced that they were repressed by the national police, who used tear gas bombs and blows, warning that their rights and liberties had been violated. The police have also reportedly attacked a group of civil society, students, and social movements demonstrators in the vicinity of a school.
And we cannot at this moment accept as normal that the President of the Republic continues to say yes to everything imposed by the International Monetary Fund. It is a very delicate issue because the President is either with the people, or if he goes with the International Monetary Fund, this dignified people will not allow that imposition. We have met with all the comrades who are calling for this struggle on behalf of our children. We're old, but we don't want this country to continue to be a country of slaves as other countries are. Today we come from Carceling Bajo to support our comrades from the community of San Miguel del Común, and also to tell them and invite them to go to the city to continue denouncing this government that is starving us and taking away the future of these children. We're not going to allow this to continue. We're going to stop this misgovernment because it is leaving us without health, without education, without scholarships, without doctors.
And on early morning, police arrested Leonides Salazar, leader of the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, in the sector of Pasto Calle, where he had participated in the blockade of the Pan American Highway in the sector known as El Chasqui. There he was read his rights, both in Quechua and Spanish, and which it was mentioned that he was being captured for the alleged crimes of rebellion and paralyzing public service. We have other informations. Peruvian prosecutors set a new date for questioning President Pedro Castillo, who has been under investigation for 2 weeks for alleged corruption charges. Peruvian prosecutor Pablo Sanchez said the head of state will be questioned next Friday at the public prosecutor's office. In this regard, Castillo's lawyer, Benji Espinosa, explained that the Supreme Court will review the appeal of precautionary rights, which stated that the investigation should be dropped because it violates the president's immunity during the exercise of his duties. The United Kingdom government will submit to Parliament a bill allowing it to unilaterally amend the post-Brexit protocol for Northern Ireland. The executive, led by Prime Minister Boris Johnson, said the proposal aims to protect the integrity of the so-called Good Friday Agreements, which in 1998 put an end to the armed conflict in that British province. The so-called Northern Ireland Protocol was the formula found by London and Brussels to avoid the establishment of a physical border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland in the post-Brexit area. The measure provides, however, that all goods coming from Britain must be subject to customs and health checks to ensure that they comply with the European Union regulations. Human rights defenders protested this Monday morning in the High Court in the afternoon in front of the Home Office in London against the British government's immigration policy, which critics said involves the illegal deportation of immigrants to Rwanda. Human rights groups said the policy is inhumane and will put migrants at risk. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has said Rwanda, whose own human rights record is under scrutiny, does not have the capacity to process the claims, and there was a risk some migrants could be returned to countries from which they had fled. Activists are challenging the deportations on a person-by-person basis, seeking to ensure that no migrants will be eligible for deportation, even if the flights are allowed to go ahead. UN refugee chief Filippo Grandi on Monday slammed an imminent Ukraine plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda as all wrong, a day before the first plane load of claimants is due to depart, warning it will set a catastrophic precedent.
It is the foundation of the right to asylum that people that are on a country's territory, especially a country that is a signatory to the convention and has the institutions to deal with that, to export that responsibility to another country runs contrary to any notion of responsibility sharing, of international responsibility, and so forth. What am I going to tell them if they say, a rich country like the UK is sending them abroad? I'll do the same. I'll close my border. I say, I want to save them from a dangerous journey, and they can go to another country. The precedent that this creates is catastrophic for a concept that needs to be shared like asylum.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us.
El mundo se mueve constantemente y todos los días se generan nuevos sucesos. Se mueve la geopolítica mundial. Nos preguntamos qué hay detrás de cada acontecimiento, cuáles son las consecuencias y cómo nos afectan. Ante estas preguntas, buscaremos poner el punto en la I.
Per month over the next few months to support efforts to maintain the Kiev government open. According to Derek Hogan, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the State for Europe, they have already committed $1 billion through diverse mechanisms to be able to provide that assistance, meaning direct budget support, which makes up for approximately $1.5 billion. Such resolution proposed by the United States, Britain, France, and Germany accused Iran of non-cooperation. On Thursday, it was announced on Vienna that Iran had told the IAEA it was removing 27 surveillance cameras from its nuclear facilities. Qatar's comprehensive plan of action will move to negotiations forward and mentioned the pressures Lebanon faces to avoid investigating in its water wealth. Now we move on to other topics. Chinese authorities launched a new mass test on Monday in the most populous district of Beijing after an outbreak of COVID-19 in a bar forced the reimposition of several restrictions. This outbreak, linked to one particular bar, resulted in the infection of at least 183 people. As a result, authorities again ordered the closure of bars, nightclubs, and karaoke bars in several neighborhoods, including Chaoyang, the epicenter of the outbreak, and delayed the reopening of schools scheduled for Monday. The Chaoyang district, which is home to some luxury stores, offices, and also embassies, launched mass tests for its 3.5 million residents and millions of employees on Monday. All will have to undergo 3 PCR tests in 3 consecutive days. The Chinese Ministry of Health announced on Monday 143 new cases of COVID-19 in the country. Japanese official sources said on Monday that more than 9 million COVID-19 cases have been registered in the country after 5,708 patients were diagnosed with disease last week. The national accumulated death toll rose to 30,905 since the beginning of the global health crisis. As a result of the internal stabilization of the health crisis, the Japanese government continues to relax its border controls.